Hey everyone, today's story is about a bottom-tier salaryman who reincarnates into another world with only one skill. Game, and somehow, it makes him completely overpowered. Let's begin. The room was dark. The light from the monitor fell on Aikian's face. He was a lonely middle-aged man with no goals in life. He had a thankless job that made him sick. He found solace in games. They were the most precious thing in his life. So dear that one day he ended up in another world without ever letting go of the joystick. The sounds of an argument came from the neighboring apartment. Aikian, not paying much attention to it, was carrying a box upstairs when the screams became audible. The family quarrel spilled out of the house, and now an unfamiliar girl was flying backwards into the main character, knocking him off his feet. These were his last memories before death. He woke up in another world as an old man. He grimaced and moaned in pain from the strong blow to his head from the dekoban. Although the fruit was hard, its flesh was soft and juicy. The old man whose body Aikian had entered was an adventurer. As a result, he began to collect herbs day after day. The main character learned who the previous owner of the body was. His childhood was difficult. To reduce food expenses, he was kicked out of his home as a child. Upon arriving in the capital, he became an adventurer. The old man was diligent and pursued his dream hand in hand with his comrades. However, his efforts were not enough. He was abandoned by those he considered friends, and loneliness overtook him. Even after reincarnation, Aikian could not adapt to local life. In his old job, he was an office worker, and such a life was new to him. He was tormented by thoughts of how to change his life here. Something familiar and dear to him became a source of comfort. In this new life, he had a unique skill called play. At any time, a joystick would appear, and he could play on a screen that formed in the air. This skill had a limitation. He could only play one game. This game was aimed at enjoying everyday life. There were many possibilities. Aikian could engage in agriculture and fishing. He could study alchemy or create his own equipment. Skills in this new world were not uncommon, but the previous owner of the body did not understand the skill game at all, so he did not really use it. Aikian, on the other hand, was an experienced player, and this idea pleased him. He thought that the ability to use the skill would be useful to him. Be that as it may, despite this, he believed that playing the game called real life was not that interesting. His routine consisted of low-level orders and cheap hotels. He lived like this for 10 years. On one of those nights, which were all similar to each other, he had a strange dream. Leaning against the bed, Aikian saw someone. Rubbing his eyes, he tried to recognize the stranger. The stranger turned out to be himself from a past life. Recognition appeared in his eyes, and his anxiety subsided. Another version of himself was dressed as a game character, and pointing at the screen, Aikian looked closer. The stranger smiled at him, and the adventurer woke up. He woke up sweaty and confused. He saw a joystick in front of him. Aikian wondered about the reason for his dream and decided that he had dozed off while playing. Pulling himself together and settling on the bed, he called up the game screen. Thoughts of the strange dream lingered in his mind. Rubbing his eyes, he remembered himself pointing at the screen. Suddenly, it dawned on him. He recognized the place he had been pointing at. Aikian started the game. His character arrived at the city hall. It was a cute, cartoonish place with a trading post in the center and a girl behind the counter. This was exactly what he had seen in his dream. Analyzing the game description, he understood what he could do at the trading post. The instructions were clear. He could post anything for sale or purchase on the bulletin board. After that, other players could make a deal with him, which made this method of trading convenient. The joy did not last long. Aikian realized that he had never met other players in this game. As he pondered, he browsed through the available features. The absence of other players was the reason he had not entered the game before. However, his disappointment quickly passed, and he decided to try out this platform. His first ad was for the sale of apples. To list the lot, he had to specify a price. After thinking for a moment, he set the minimum price at 3 coins, figuring it was just a game. In the real market, apples cost 300 coins, while in the game, the price was only 30. The ad went live instantly. Aikian marked his offer on the order board. Soon, a notification appeared about the opportunity to buy an apple for 3 coins. At first, he decided that it was his own ad and that he now intended to buy it himself. The price seemed ridiculous to him, and he decided to complete the purchase. After pressing the button, a notification appeared in front of him about insufficient funds and instructions on how to replenish his balance through a slot in the joystick. Experiencing a strong shock, he exclaimed his surprise aloud and dropped the coins into the receiver with trembling hands. With the sound of the coins falling, an apple appeared on the bedside table. With difficulty controlling his emotions, Aikian realized what had happened and quietly muttered about his purchase. At that moment, when the apple appeared and he was able to touch it, a star fell from the black sky. It was the brightest moment. The main character reproached himself for not learning about the capabilities of his skill earlier. The apple he bought in the game turned out to be the sweetest and most delicious he had ever eaten. Morning came. Teihen realized that he could buy things from his own ads in the game. He decided to go to the trade guild. Once there, he froze at the table while waiting when suddenly someone called out to him. It was Liberia, a young guild employee with long hair and thick glasses. She apologized for the wait. The employee politely explained her role, saying that she was responsible for buying and selling products, and that she needed to try the goods provided in order to make a decision. Teihen nodded cheerfully and agreed. After a short preparation, the apple was cut into neat slices. Liberia enthusiastically announced that the apple was very tasty. This did not surprise the main character in the least. He crossed his arms confidently. He knew that most apples in this world were sour, which is why the girl was so surprised. After tasting it, Liberia wrote Teihen a check for 3,000 coins, offering that price. The main character was stunned by this number. His internal calculator was already analyzing the profit. He would sell one apple to the guild for 300 coins, which was 10 times more than its game value. When the guy recovered from the pleasant shock, the employee with a good-natured smile informed him that they were exclusively engaged in wholesale trade. When Teihen brought more apples, the guild would buy them for 500 coins apiece. Hearing this news, his words of agreement could be heard far beyond the building. The next day, first thing in the morning, Teihen delivered a whole barrel of apples to the guild. Liberia was taken aback by the speed of his delivery, because just yesterday Teihen had brought apples only as a sample. The main character felt a knot in his stomach. He thought they weren't expecting him. However, the employee protested animatedly and immediately handed him a check for 25,000 coins. Teihen double-checked. The price per apple was indeed 500 coins. Breaking the awkward silence, the young people introduced themselves to each other. Liberia emphasized that she would be very pleased to work with Teihen. The guy was happy, but even more confused. Even in all his time as an adventurer, no one had ever introduced themselves to him or asked his name. The only thing that interested those around him was his completed tasks, documents, and payments for finished orders. The moment when Liberia called him by his full name stuck in his mind. He felt happy to hear his name spoken by someone after so many years. Above the large, bright city that finally shone for Teihen, he felt that he had become part of this world. As a novice merchant, Teihen went for a walk. On both sides of him stretched a lively market, overflowing with goods, shoppers eager to buy something, and salespeople who were happy to help them. The protagonist's gaze slid into an alleyway and met the hungry, empty eyes of a little girl. She was standing next to two other equally destitute orphans. Their heads were covered with cloaks, if the old rags could even be called that. Teihen remembered the fate of the old man, the first owner of his body. The girls, like him once, had been abandoned. This scene was typical for the streets of the capital. Before, the main character could not help such children. He had to close his eyes and try to move on with his life. But today, everything had changed. He turned to the girls and held out an apple to them. It was like a symbol of kindness, lighting up their faces. Teihen offered them apples to try. He chose his words slowly, as if trying to tame a wild cat. The hungry girls accepted the treat and began to chew. Teihen asked if they had a place to sleep. The answer was no. Then he learned that the girls were living on the street. After considering the situation, the main character came to the conclusion that the little girls should become adventurers. By that time, only the stems remained of the apples. The main character sent the children to the guild to register. He himself went to buy them the cheapest equipment. Walking around the market and talking to merchants, he gathered a small starter kit. Then came a training. Teihen diligently taught the girls how to gather herbs. Together, they moved through the forest, studying every blade of grass. They paused at a large clearing surrounded by trees. The girls sat down close to each other and began gathering herbs. Teihen smiled as he watched them. It may not be the highest-paying job, but it would allow the girls to earn a living for themselves. When evening began to fall, the tour continued. The girls learned where they could eat heartily and cheaply and where they could rent a room for the night. At the end, after saying goodbye, the main character was about to leave when the girls called out to him. With fire in their eyes and broad smiles, they thanked him from the bottom of their hearts. At the doorway, Teihen suddenly realized that all his charges had been little girls all along. A new day. The main character delivers a new batch of apples to the trade guild. After realizing the true nature of his skill, Teihen began to live much better. He delivers apples once a week. Happy Liberia, standing behind the counter, accepted the batch of apples. After checking all the items, she thanked the new merchant for his cooperation. As an adventurer fulfilling regular orders, his earnings were capped at 7,000 coins per week. Now, having retrained as a merchant, he earns 25,000 coins per week with the help of his skill. Aekian rubbed his head in embarrassment. He thought about giving up his adventurous lifestyle, but he couldn't sit around doing nothing. To save money, he rented a room only for the night, as he had to pay extra for daytime stays. So he looked for something to do. The confusion was evident on his face. He thought about buying a house, but saving money was more important. After all, you never know when apples will fall in price. Leaning his back against a small wooden wall, he began to think aloud. If the price of fruit fell, he would have to become an adventurer again. After studying the new assignment on the board, he announced his destination and headed into the forest. Aekian settled in a clearing not far from the capital. Adventurers often visited this place to collect medicinal herbs. A bag of herbs cost 1,000 coins. Looking into the thicket, the main character thought about going deeper and collecting herbs that alchemists pay more for. On the other hand, there was a risk of encountering monsters, and Aekian did not want that at all. His train of thought changed. If Aekian knew alchemy, he could earn more. It was not possible to brew potions in the game itself because the necessary herbs were lacking. Clutching the collected plant in his hand, an idea came to him. He summoned the joystick. He used to sell apples that existed in the game, but now he decided to sell an item that did not exist in the game world, only in the real world. After editing the quantity and price on the board, he posted an ad for the purchase of medicinal herbs for 1,000 coins. He pressed confirm. The bag of herbs he had just collected disappeared, just as the apple had once appeared. A notification appeared on the screen. His game character had gained access to medicinal herbs and had come up with a recipe for a low-level healing potion. Overcoming his surprise, Aekian sent his character to the alchemy table. A second passed, then two, and he managed to make a low-level healing potion. The main character exclaimed with delight at his success. A smile spread across his face, and his cheeks flushed. Later that evening, at the hotel, Aekian looked at the box of potions and wondered where to sell them. The minimum price for such a potion was 150 coins per piece. There was demand for it among soldiers, adventurers, and hospitals. But soldiers and hospitals had their own alchemists. Aekian came to the conclusion that it was worth going to the Adventurers Guild. He heard whispering behind the door. He got out of bed and opened the door. Behind it stood the familiar little adventurers. The girls turned to the sound of his voice. The main character told them that he had some apples left and shared them. The girls thanked the kind man and left. And the main character decided that he didn't mind sharing at all. Aekian spent the next day at the Adventurers Guild. He politely caught the attention of the girl behind the counter. She was surprised that he had come so early and asked him the purpose of his visit. The main character said he wanted to sell low-level healing potions to the guild. The girl's eyes widened. After a moment of deep thought, she explained that she had to evaluate the goods before purchasing them. Aekian had no objection. She made sure that the potions matched the stated characteristics, then announced the price. The guild would pay 300 coins per bottle. All of Aekian's potions amounted to 2,700 coins. After reaching an agreement, they completed the transaction. After analyzing the result, the main character came to the conclusion that the difference between the in-game and real-world prices was 150 coins per bottle and 1,350 coins for 9 bottles. Considering the time spent gathering herbs, it was not as profitable as he had expected. Lost in thought, he propped his chin on his knuckles. If he could grow these herbs himself in the game, the profit would be much higher. He was interrupted by the voice of an employee. She called out to Aekian and asked if he was an alchemist. Aekian habitually ran his hand through his hair, shook his head, and explained that he had only studied the recipe, which is why he was able to prepare the simplest potion. The girl beamed. Clutching the paper in her hand, she exclaimed loudly how amazing it was. Her joy was so strong that it seemed to reflect on Aekian. She spoke to him so cheerfully, as if it were her own success. The girl said that after all his years of service in the guild, his efforts had finally paid off. The protagonist himself was not happy to hear such things from others, and it was easy to see that on his face. But the girl did not let up. She continued to talk about how he had learned alchemy at the right time. Their old alchemist, who had worked in the guild for many years, had moved to work in a hospital. Due to the popularity of dungeons in the West, the guild had completely run out of potions. She flashed Aekian the sweetest and most sincere smile and said that the guild would be very happy to work with him. The girl's sincerity touched him. He blushed and agreed to consider the opportunity. He was surprised to hear such warm gratitude for his work. Returning to the hotel, Aekian decided to start mass production of potions. Immersed in sweet memories of the lovely employee of the Adventurers Guild, he became embarrassed and blushed. However, a new dilemma soon arose. Even if he planted all the beds in the game, the herbs would not grow. This meant he needed workers, people who would grow the plants. Lost in thought and maintaining a pensive pose, he considered his options. He had almost no acquaintances in the guild, and he had not communicated with his old comrades for a long time. The thought was so absorbing that he did not notice the children running past him, urging each other on. And then it dawned on him. Poverty was rampant in this world. To help their families, children had to work from a young age. Most of them, like Teihen himself once did, earned money by gathering herd for the guild. He decided to take a chance. He approached the children. They weren't very polite. They immediately asked what the old man wanted. They said they were busy and were going to the guild. Teihen was not upset. He offered to buy a bag of herbs from them for 1,100 coins, which was 100 coins more than the guild would pay. The children were thrilled, unable to believe their luck. The deal was done. Teihen received 5 bags of herbs, and the children received 5,500 coins. The children were immensely grateful. Shouting joyfully and discussing their luck, they went off to get something to eat. Waving goodbye to them, Teihen headed to a secluded spot where no one could see him, and he used his skill. He received 300 coins for 1 bottle of potion. The main character had enough resources for 60 bottles. This brought in 18,000 coins in revenue. The cost of purchasing raw materials was 14,500 coins. The final profit was 3,500 coins. He decided that this was not enough, but apples did not provide sufficient income either. These thoughts preoccupied Teihen so much that he reached the city gates well after midnight. The gates were closed. Realizing this, Teihen sighed. With no other options, he headed for the forest. Sitting gloomily by the fire, he sighed and accepted his mistake. He shouldn't have gotten so carried away with the game. Under the starry sky and with his stomach growling, he decided to try to cook something in the game. The instructions said that the game character could create food but not eat it. Such items served only as decoration, similar to food samples in restaurants. Thoughts of food finally tempted Teihen, and he began his experiment. The first dish he chose was a classic Asian lunch for 300 coins. Looking at the menu, the main character realized that 1 dish would not be enough, so he added 2 meat sandwiches. After the purchase, with a happy face, he marveled at this skill. The food appeared before him, glowing. A large piece of grilled salmon lay on a wooden board. Next to it was a bowl of rice and miso soup with tofu. Wishing himself bon appetit, Teihen began to eat. The salmon, with a slight hint of salt, was grilled. The rice was sweet and warm, and the taste of the tofu from the soup spread pleasantly in his mouth. He often ate meals like this at work in his previous life. Back then, he ate alone, right at his computer, but the food wasn't as delicious. Teihen cried from the mind-blowing taste, and, continuing to chew, couldn't stop the tears of happiness. He thanked this world for the food. Already very full, Teihen sat comfortably by the fire with his legs crossed, and the full moon was shining in the sky. Suddenly, someone called out to him. Startled, the main character turned toward the sound. It was a woman's voice in the forest. He asked who it was, and he saw a beautiful girl standing behind him with a tiara on her head. She asked him why he was so confused. The Grand Duchess Famiri Leba Taranstria introduced herself, and Teihen did not immediately realize her status. The girl pouted, covering her face with a fan, because the guy had never heard of her. He carefully chose his words to explain. Teihen himself understood that he had never encountered aristocrats in his entire life. The noblewoman, even more depressed, casually complained about her royal lineage. Her father was King Ru, founder of the Kingdom of Belstein, and she, his 3rd daughter, remained unrecognized even by the citizens of the country. Teihen bowed his head to the ground. This was exactly what one should do if one incurred the wrath of the nobility. At Lady Famiri's request, the main character raised his head and thanked her. At that moment, he felt a strange weakness. An unpleasant chill slowly spread through his body, causing him to be on guard. His gaze slid to the hem of the Duchess's dress, and there were no legs there. Then the girl condescendingly enlightened the protagonist about the story, noting his ignorance. Mrs. Famiri's father, the founder of the kingdom, had lived here 300 years ago. During the story, Teihen sat down, tucked his legs under him, and stammered, asking about the storyteller's age. She boasted that she was quite skilled in magic and possessed the secret knowledge of immortality. The main character wondered if she was a lich or a ghost. Their conversation continued under the night sky. The girl reassured her listener, assuring him that she was not interested in his life at all. She explained the reason directly, referring to his age. At that moment, her sweet face became serious, and the former duchess showed interest in his skill. Then Teihen realized that she had seen him using his ability. The princess's mood changed. Instead of a stern interrogation, her face took on the sweetest features. She beamed as she asked about Teihen's skill and clarified whether it was true that he had created pure white rice. There was no point in hiding it, so he confessed. She noted with delight that she had been right. After that, The girl became embarrassed, hid her face behind her fan, and began to talk. Her father had always dreamed of trying this delicacy. Seeing the rice in the hands of the main character, Lady Famiri remembered this. Finally, she politely and slightly embarrassed asked for the same dish to be prepared for her. After a moment's thought, Teihen agreed. He very carefully handed the treat to his guest. She noted her interest in his skill. Taking the food, the girl moved a little to the side and asked him to wait. And in an instant, she disappeared. A couple of seconds later, her figure reappeared in the empty clearing. Pleased with the treat, the princess presented Teihen with a reward for his work. The object resembled a cherry. The main character asked what it was called, but the girl only said that he would find out everything by tasting the reward. After that, she began to say goodbye and left a warning about the approaching rain. Smiling and covering herself with a fan, she told him that he would experience the joy brought to the founding king of these lands. At that moment, downpour fell on the ground. Teihen took shelter in a tent for 3,500 coins. This, incidentally, was his earnings from selling potions. Remembering the reward from the girl, he took out the berries and placed them in his palm. He didn't know what to do with them. He could eat them or try to grow them in the game. It was a gift from the immortal princess, and he was afraid to even hold it in his hands. She told him to try the reward, and then Teihen would find out what it was. The girl didn't seem angry. In the end, it was decided to plant the item in the game. The joystick was in his hand, and the item was loaded. The result of the study revealed that the item was a golden cherry with a minimum price of 1 coin. Teihen was disappointed with the price, but he reasoned that everything in the game was cheap. If he wanted, he could set his own price for the item and withdraw the money. Something stopped the main character from doing this. He could have used the money. After all, he assessed himself adequately and knew that he was not a serious player. Teihen was interested in completing the game at medium or easy difficulty. At that moment, the growth of a golden cherry tree appeared on the game screen, and the medicinal herbs began to sprout. This cheered him up. Perhaps there was a chance to grow everything he needed in this way. He sent his character off to do some crafting, while he himself pondered his life. At that moment, his main goal was to improve his living conditions. He could even save up for a house simply by selling apples once a week. But was that all the main character wanted? He asked himself this question as he pondered his own desires. A notification popped up, pulling him out of his thoughts. Adventurer's armor had been created. Teihen said the word adventurism out loud and became excited about the idea. In this world, adventurers who did not take on combat missions were called iron-ranked adventurers. They were treated like laborers. Teihen was one of them. It couldn't be said that this was a bad thing, but he didn't choose this path. It was just that he had inherited a body with an already established status. Neither the previous owner of the body nor Teihen himself enjoyed this work. The old man wasn't bad. It's just that his efforts didn't pay off. The main character talked to himself and realized that both he and the previous owner of the body just wanted recognition. The assistants from the Adventurers Guild and the Merchants Guild were kind to him, relied on the main character, and were happy to have his help. The time had come to receive the recognition he deserved. He had already figured out how to use his skill, and this power pushed him forward. The rain poured down like a wall, and Teihen, sitting in his tent, decided that since he wanted to engage in real adventuring, it was time to go to the dungeons. Falling asleep to the sound of the downpour, Teihen had a dream. In the dream, the previous owner of the body encountered goblins for the first time. He had been tasked with escorting a caravan. The group included 2 experienced adventurers and 3 novice observers who wanted to gain experience. One of the team members suggested going to the dungeon after completing the task, and everyone agreed. They were excited and happy. There were many goblins. Terrifying and angry, they chased the old man. Paralyzed with fear and crawling away from them, the man became a liability on this mission. Compared to the others, he could do nothing, finding himself surrounded. Somehow managing to deal with the attackers and receiving timely support from their elders, the group survived. An experienced warrior asked about the condition of the newcomers, and they decided to move on. The old man reached out his hand, calling out to his comrades. But their eyes were empty. They turned away from him. It was the moment when they rejected and abandoned him. The main character wept, realizing the whole situation. Since then, having been abandoned by the members of the group, the old man had only seen them a couple of times in the guild, already in fancy armor. This is how the division between those who move forward and those who stay behind occurs. Teihen clutched his shirt near his heart. He felt the old man's pain. The people close to him had left him, and the main character shared that heaviness in his chest. In tears, he described the situation as awful. Wiping away his tears and pulling himself together, Teihen decided that he would show everyone what he was capable of and what the old man had been capable of. A week passed. The main character was practicing lunging with a spear target. He was at the training ground of the Adventurers Guild. He held his spear at the ready, sweaty and out of breath. He threw a towel over his shoulders and wiped his face. He needed a break. At that moment, a man with an eye patch called out to him. His long hair was tied back in a low ponytail. Kokusei, a former adventurer and now a combat training instructor, approached Teihen. In the past, he himself had spent many years on adventures until a serious eye injury forced him to give up his dangerous life. The instructor decided to find out how things were going with the main character. Kokusei had heard that Teihen, in addition to training, was involved in alchemy and bought ingredient from street children. Teihen tensed up. A hysterical smile appeared on his face. It turns out that he is being watched when he is completely unaware of his surroundings. Kokusei asked with slight irritation why an alchemist needed combat training at all. Teihen scratched his cheek with his fingertip. He replied that it was simply a way to remember his youth. The instructor laughed loudly. Teihen asked him to stop laughing at him. The laughter gradually subsided. Kokusei apologized, but added that the scene really did look very funny. Teihen was about to respond, but didn't have time. The door opened. Teihen turned and stared silently at the newcomers. Among them was a long-haired girl in combat gear. She wore a skirt, had a sword on her belt, and carried a scroll in her hands. Teihen quietly asked Kokusei if he knew these people. The instructor shook his head. In his opinion, they didn't look like beginners at all. Teihen quickly came to a conclusion. The girl's sword looked expensive. She was probably from a noble family. His curiosity quickly faded. It was none of his business. After training at the training ground, Teihen headed to the public bathhouse. He washed away the sweat and fatigue, then went to the hotel. In the steam room, the main character made himself comfortable on a bench. On the way home, someone called out his name. It was the same children from whom Teihen had bought herbs. A blond boy in a bandana, a shaggy guy in the center, apparently the leader, and a timid, neatly trimmed blond boy. The children informed the main character that they had gathered herbs again. Teihen offered to buy all their bags. He couldn't carry that much himself, so the children gladly agreed to help. The children cheerfully set off for the delivery point. They giggled, chatted, and joked. Apparently, each of them dreamed of becoming an adventurer. These boys reminded Teihen of his own youth, when he used to walk with his friends in the same way. The main character quietly hoped that they would be able to earn a living without dangerous adventures. In his hotel room, Teihen collapsed onto the bed. He threw his hands behind his head. He reminded himself that he was staying in the cheapest hotel in town. His sudden, youthful enthusiasm should not push him into reckless actions. After today's deal, the boys admitted that thanks to the money from Teihen, they were able to save up for real weapons. A slight smile appeared on the main character's face. He called up the joystick. Deep down, Teihen knew he wanted to move on. In the game, the character brewed potions, harvested crops, tended fields, and fished. And so it went until late at night. As before, time flew by unnoticed. His stomach reminded him to eat. He could have gone out into the city, but he didn't feel like it. Teihen decided to buy food directly in the game. He had recently eaten a classic Japanese lunch, and now he wanted tonkatsu. He remembered the events with the lady and the golden cherry she had given him. The character checked the garden. A golden cherry tree appeared on the screen. It took much longer than a normal apple tree to grow in a week. The character picked the ripe clusters. The golden berries looked almost the same as regular ones, except for their distinctive color. Teihen moved it to the real world. The main character popped one golden berry into his mouth. A second later, his taste buds came alive. A moderate sweetness with a slight sourness spread in his mouth. An expression of pure delight appeared on Teihen's face. This cherry reminded him of the taste of a high-quality one he had tried in his past life. The excitement that had tormented him all these days because of the ghost princess's gift finally subsided. Suddenly, a deafening ringing pierced his body. It was as if an electric shock had passed through his entire body. Teihen froze, pressing his hand to his chest. The sound grew louder in his head, then abruptly faded into silence. A strange voice sounded in his mind. It congratulated the main character. It announced that he had gained 1 point of strength in his status. The congratulations were repeated. Now the main character had the skill Daytime Wanderer. Teihen froze in shock. He shouted a question, refusing to believe what was happening. The name of the skill reminded him of the nickname for vampires. Teihen jerked his hand to his mouth. He now had elongated fangs. The next morning, Teihen slowly stepped out into the sun. The bright rays did not harm him in any way. Judging by the name of the skill, he had become one of those rare vampires who are not afraid of daylight. The fangs disappeared as suddenly as they had appeared. Teihen decided to go into the forest and find the lady. The forest was crowded. It had been raining heavily for the last few days. Medicinal herbs had grown in abundance, and this had attracted many gatherers. He reached the place where he had last met the princess. He whispered her name. The only response was silence. Teihen remembered that the girl had appeared to him at night. He decided to return after sunset and try again. When darkness fell, the main character continued to call out to Lady Famiri. He was almost in despair when, out of nowhere, he heard a response. Teihen turned around sharply and shouted at the top of his voice. Standing in front of him was a girl with a bored expression on her face. She was lazily fanning herself with a fan. The girl reproached him discontentedly. The main character had called her himself, but as soon as she appeared, he yelled like a slaughtered piglet, showing a disgusting attitude. Teihen came to his senses, began to apologize, and explained that she had appeared right behind him. He was not allowed to finish his sentence. The late heiress immediately understood the reason for the call. Teihen told her the whole story. Lady Famiri laughed loudly, covering her mouth with a fan. The protagonist tried to stop her and blamed her gift for everything. The berry that the lady gave to Teihen was called boundless divine love. Whoever eats, it receives a blessing in the form of any gift. The gift could slightly strengthen a person or reward them with a rare skill. Teihen couldn't calm down. He kept telling Ms. Famiri that being a vampire wasn't a skill, but an entire race. The girl, drawing a magic circle in the air, thoughtfully imagined how difficult it would be to explain everything to the main character. Having finished casting the spell, she demanded that the main character simply accept what was directed at him. Teihen didn't understand anything and began to question her actions. Ms. Famiri, as if nothing had happened, said that she had granted him magic. The stunned guy fell silent. Then came the instruction. Say the word assessment and see for yourself. Teihen obeyed. He shouted the word and stretched his arms forward. A translucent panel with characteristics materialized in the air. The panel suddenly disappeared. Lady Famiri impassively announced his stats. A second later, she burst into her usual loud, rumbling laughter. Through tears of laughter, she called Teihen's stats worthless. He only had enough mana to use the assessment skill for a second. Teihen gritted his teeth and listened silently to her laughter. When the princess finally calmed down, she convinced the main character that he was still human. Vampire abilities were just a skill, nothing more. Teihen listened with relief. A soft glow seemed to spread around him. The girl added that there was nothing to worry about. His heart felt lighter. His fear of nightlife and feeding on blood receded. The unpleasant, prickling sensation that had been piercing him all day finally disappeared. Having received the long-awaited answer, Teihen announced that he was going to eat. The lady noted his intention and asked if he would be so kind as to treat her father to a meal. Teihen agreed without objection. Today's lunch was tonkatsu for 350 coins. The serving consisted of rice, miso soup, a chopped cutlet in a crispy breading, and a small amount of vegetables on the side. Upon receiving the food, the lady smiled slyly. According to her estimates, the treat covered only half of her kindness and advice. Teihen flinched again, as if triggered. The girl said instructively, he needed to diligently develop his body and spirit. Only then would she accept him into her service. With that, she disappeared. It seemed that Teihen had gotten himself into trouble with the ghost. Teihen took shelter in his tent from the rain that had begun to fall. Dinner was as delicious as expected. He slowly enjoyed the pork to the steady sound of raindrops on the fabric. Sometime later, the main character began to eat golden cherries. His stats gradually increased. He was still very far from reaching the Kozer level. Teihen glanced at the instructor's stats using his assessment skill. Even without the assessment skill, Teihen understood that he would not become very strong. The plan was to continue trading and keep eating cherries. Suddenly, a girl called out to him. She asked if he had seen the man from the wanted poster. The reward was 5 million coins. The same woman had approached him with this question a few days ago. Teihen was stunned by the amount. His face turned pale, and a silent question froze in his eyes. The woman, not waiting for an answer, repeated the question, now louder, more emotional, and more demanding. Teihen shook his head and honestly explained his reaction to the size of the reward. The girl slumped. Her eyelids grew heavy. Her face darkened. She said she was willing to pay any amount to find this man. She asked Teihen to memorize the face in the portrait. It was a man with dark, unkempt hair that fell slightly over his face. He wore a headdress, had narrow eyes, and a gaze full of cruelty and danger. The lower part of his face was hidden by a scarf. Teihen studied the image carefully. The face seemed vaguely familiar. He was told that the fugitive will be taken alive or dead. He will be paid a good sum for any information. The main character couldn't help but ask what this man had done. The answer was a heavy one. The girl's face was contorted with pain. The shadows deepened, erasing all tenderness. The criminal from the ad had killed her older brother. Teihen froze at the news. He couldn't find the words to say. He only expressed silent understanding. He made it to the guild. He found a free bench and collapsed onto it. His elbows rested on his knees. The girl's story brought terrible thoughts to his mind. She was going to avenge her brother. The story resembled the plot of an old historical novel. In his past life, Teihen had no close ties. In his new life, he had neither family nor friends. Therefore, he could not fully understand what it meant to be attached to someone. A rare thought about family, or at least a close connection, flashed through the main character's mind. The girl's face was full of sadness. Teihen decided that such connections were not worth it. He leaned back on the bench and put his hands behind his head. He thought that no one would be attracted to an aging body like his. To distract himself from his heavy thoughts, Teihen headed for the task board. He studied its vast surface carefully. The assignments were hung neatly, in strict order. It was clear that someone was carefully monitoring the order and appearance of the board. Despite the abundance of assignments, Teihen could only take on tasks involving gathering herbs or cleaning. For everything else, his rank was too low or he lacked experience. He wanted to take on missions to escort or hunt monsters in the dungeon. But he understood that he did not yet have enough desire or strength. He froze, staring at his own hand. Thoughts of his lack of strength consumed him more and more. Someone called out to him and asked if he was looking for work. It was the Windcutter group. A long time ago, Teihen had worked for them as a porter, carrying equipment and trophies. Teihen asked if they had returned from the dungeon. The guy replied that he had almost guessed right. Now Windcutter had decided to take on easier work. The pay was less, but they could rest a little. The job was to escort a caravan. The reward was 45,000 coins, 9,000 for each person. The leader suggested that Teihen join them. He emphasized his caution. There was a bonus for the danger of the journey. The ad specified a condition, a minimum of 5 people. 3 days on the road. Teihen realized that the group simply didn't have enough people, which is why they called him, given their past experience working together. Without this coincidence, they would have found someone stronger. He didn't know how to feel about it. He had enough money and could continue trading items from the game. But he wanted to try out his new skills in action, especially since the task was not a solo one. Teihen smiled at the group and agreed to go with them. The leader cheerfully, almost jumping, went to the administrator to report that the order had been accepted. Teihen was sure. 9,000 coins for simple escorting in a strong group was easy money. He said goodbye to Windcutter. They agreed to meet tomorrow morning at the city gates. Teihen had one more important thing to do. Before leaving on the mission, he had to sell the new goods to the trade guild. Inside the room, an appetizing bunch of grapes lay on a saucer. Liberia had already tasted one berry. Holding the second berry to her lips, the girl hesitated. The next moment, Liberia beamed like the sun. The excited employee announced that she was ready to buy the whole bunch for 2,000 coins. Teihen asked again. In response, Liberia just laughed conspiratorially. The cost of grapes turned out to be 4 times higher than that of apples. With the air of an expert, Liberia explained that the apples supplied by Teihen were already in demand among merchants and nobles. Her aura changed dramatically. It was as if the god of trade had entered her. With burning eyes, the girl assured him that these grapes would turn the market upside down. A happy Liberia said goodbye to the main character. The news that apples were being bought up by representatives of the upper class came as a surprise to him. After that, Teihen went to buy provisions. He bought medicinal herbs from the children. He warned the adventurous girls that he would be out of town for a while. As a farewell gift, he treated them to grapes. In the evening at the hotel, Teihen had a combo meal for dinner. A hamburger, French fries, and a Coke. It all cost 200 coins. He ate slowly, savoring every bite. His face was lit up with bliss. The junk food, which he hadn't had in 10 years, seemed incredibly delicious. When the meal was over, footsteps could be heard at the door. The little adventurers stood with an armful of books. Apparently, they had been commissioned to catalog the books. In this world, book printing was not very developed. Books cost a lot of money, so the inventory work was generously paid. Teihen had tried to remember something of the local language, but the previous owner of the body had not been literate. The main character helped the girls with their work. It was he who suggested that they try their hand at what they already knew how to do. That's how the girls found the job of cataloging books. Teihen was incredibly proud of them. By the end of the day, the main character was completely ready for tomorrow's task. A joystick materialized in his hands. In the game, he could create weapons and equipment for NPC adventurers. They killed monsters and brought back materials. Teihen used these to create new items. Over the past few years, the main character had accumulated a huge amount of high-quality equipment. He didn't know what he would encounter on the Windcutter quest. Taking 2 rare items was risky. Teihen chose simple and reliable equipment that would help him stay alive. The selected items materialized in the world. A spear made of high-quality alloy with a thick wooden handle, an elongated tip pointed with 4 cuts, reinforced leather armor on the chest, a travel bag. As usual before going to sleep, he ate a golden cherry. It was beneficial, but the main character hated the accompanying ringing in his head. The day was over. The new moon appeared in the sky. Teihen settled into bed and quickly fell asleep. Early in the morning, the adventurers met at the gate. The leader, Wind Cutter, noted the protagonist's good armor. Teihen ran his hand through his hair and thanked him briefly. Everyone was ready. The squad formed up and headed for the caravan. The group approached 2 covered wagons. An emblem adorned the sides. Teihen remembered that it was the sign of a well-known store. Caravans usually carried piles of goods to another city. Here, however, there was only 1 barrel on the 2 carts. The group leader introduced the squad to the man holding the reins. He was waiting for them. When everyone had gathered, he suggested they climb into the wagon and set off. This seemed strange. Why hire a whole group of adventurers for 1 barrel? A voice interrupted his thoughts. The man in the wagon called out his full name. It was Wizard. He was visibly intimidated. Could it be that Teihen didn't remember him? It turned out to be one of the old man's old comrades. Old comrades don't disappear. They just exist. They hadn't seen each other for many years. After that incident, when the young adventurers fought off the goblins from the caravan, Wizard achieved success. The main character asked what Wizard was doing here. In response, he silently showed his wooden leg. Still pointing at it, he made it clear that with such an injury, he could no longer be an adventurer. Teihen's pupils narrowed in shock and confusion. He was at a loss for words. A man approached and ordered everyone to stop talking in a sharp bass voice. The coachman apologized. The main character was told to get into the carriage. He nodded and headed inside. He turned around at the last moment. Teihen assumed that Wizard had left the adventurers after losing his leg. Sitting at the back of the carriage, the main character leaned against the backrest. He was advised not to dwell on heavy thoughts. The member of the Wind Cutter group who called out to him turned out to be an archer, a young guy with bangs falling over his right eye. The guy noticed that Teihen and the driver were acquainted and asked if he was mistaken in his judgment. The main character confirmed with a polite smile that this was the case. There was a moment of silence. Suddenly, the archer held his hand in front of the main character's face and told him to look. All the fingers at the base of his palm were covered with scars. The guy began his story. In one of the battles in the dungeon, he lost all the fingers on his right hand. For his class, fingers were the most important part of the body. He spent all his savings to get them back. But not every adventurer had that kind of money. At the end of the story, the archer returned to the topic of the coachman. He was lucky to find a job even after his injury. Throughout the conversation, the guy looked gloomy. He spoke softly, as if reliving his sad experience and sincerely sympathizing with the legless adventurer. At that moment, Teihen realized something. Perhaps the archer from Wind Cutter was trying to comfort him with this story. The guy continued talking about how many people become disabled after going to the dungeons. This is a common fate for adventurers. Teihen smiled awkwardly at the guy and said that he even envied him. After losing and regaining his fingers, he could still go to the dungeons, maintaining eye contact and smiling broadly. The young man noted his interlocutor's reaction. Even though he looked like an old man, his reaction resembled that of a small child. In fact, seeing Wizard in such a state, the main character experienced a strong shock. He clearly felt the weight of his own potential and realized that he did not want to stop, even if it looked childish. His desire to see this world with his own eyes only grew stronger. It was beginning to get dark. The sun was sinking toward the horizon. The travelers stopped at a vast lowland clearing. It was decided to set up camp for a rest. Teihen and the Wind Cutter group settled down by the fire. The tents were pitched. The dry rations were eaten. It was time to assign guard duty. The group leader briefly asked if Teihen wanted to take the night watch until morning. He agreed. In the night forest, Teihen understood that goblins usually came down from mountains. But monsters were not the only threat. He had to keep an eye on his surroundings. The main character was lost in his thoughts. When the old man was still a novice adventurer, an experienced adventurer taught him and his friends this wisdom. He told them to rely on all their senses: sight, hearing, smell. When leaving the city gates, you should always look up and survey the area. He did just that. A sound came from the forest. It was strange and did not sound natural. Teihen looked in the direction of the noise. A clawed paw appeared from behind a bush. The next moment, a horde of green monsters was approaching the camp. Confused, the main character tried to remain calm. He loudly announced the goblin attack. The camp instantly came to life. The adventurers grabbed their weapons. Teihen had never killed monsters before. A scene from his long-standing fear came to mind. a sticky paralysis that prevented him from even trying to defend himself. But now he was different. He had no choice but to defend himself and those around him. With an unpleasant scream, the goblin jumped forward. A second passed, then another. A cry escaped from the monster's throat. Teihen lunged with his spear. The pierced body twitched lifelessly. Unable to believe his eyes, Teihen felt a surge of excitement. He had done it. The joy did not last long. Anxiety returned to his face. With a nasty cackling sound, the goblins began to surround him. A whistle cut through the air. An arrow pierced the back of one of the goblins' heads. Teihen turned around. An archer from the squad was sitting in a tree. With a friendly look, he praised his comrade. Smiling broadly, the archer said he would cover him from above. Teihen, in shock, asked again about support. The main character was twisted with horror. He was interested in where the rest of the adventurers were. The main character was about to scream. There were too many goblins. He was worried that he wouldn't be able to handle them alone. The archer, sitting in a tree, calmly reasoned that the situation was not simple, and Teihen had better not get distracted from his enemies. The main character cursed, but continued the battle. Having dealt with the attackers, Teihen was exhausted and covered in sweat. His face showed fatigue and emotional turmoil. The archer jumped down from the tree and praised Teihen's work. The main character wiped his forehead with his sleeve, satisfied that it was all over. The joy of victory was short-lived. A member of the Windcutter group pointed to the lowlands. The battle was just beginning. The knight flew by in battle, finishing off a goblin with a slashing blow of his sword. The group leader was interested in the remaining enemies. A girl from the squad reported that several goblins had fled to the side. After listening to her, the leader gave the order to go after them. He couldn't help but notice that the attack was strange. Deep hollows formed under Teihen's eyes. Sweat still covered his face like fine dew. Sitting down, he agreed with the leader. Usually, goblins attacked in groups of 10. Now the attack was much larger. The leader's words snapped him out of his thoughts. The head of Windcutter reminded him that the hazard pay was not paid for nothing. It was worth being wary of threats other than goblins. The main character cried out in surprise. The leader replied that someone else could attack. The thought that the attack could have been planned stuck in his head. With these thoughts, Teihen heard a cry from the cart. It was Wizard's voice. The main character rushed inside. He called out the coachman's name and stopped short. Wizard was lying on the floor. A foot was pressed against his chest. The attacker was wearing light armor and a short cloak. A headdress and bandage covered half of his face, leaving only his eyes exposed. The enemy glanced at Teihen. The main character was breathing heavily and demanded with all his might to move away from Wizard. Voices could be heard outside. The cry did not go unnoticed, and help was already on its way. Teihen stood at the edge of the cart, clutching his spear, but not pointing it at the enemy. The attacker hissed, and with sharp jerks, he moved away. The Windcutter leader tried to stop him, but he was too fast. The archer who had arrived looked at Teihen with concern. The main character made it clear that he was fine, but the condition of the driver was much more important. Wizard waved him off. He had gotten away with a blow to the chest and assured everyone that he would live. The conclusion was obvious. The attack had been organized by that strange man. He was interested in the barrel. It was better not to know what was inside it. Otherwise, trouble was inevitable. Morning came. The usual escort mission turned into a difficult ordeal. After the goblin attack, the squad moved more cautiously. There were no more dangers, and the group reached their destination without incident. The adventurer received a check from the head of Windcutter. As they parted, they let him know that they would contact him again when new work came up. The farewell was warm, and everyone went their separate ways. Teihen glanced at the amount. 9,000 coins. It could be cashed in at the guild. He didn't expect the hazard pay to be so high. Wizard called out to him. He offered him a drink. The main character declined, said goodbye, and turned to leave. He turned around, ready to leave. They called him again. Wizard pressed his hand to his chest. His voice trembled and sounded heavy. He asked if Teihen still held a grudge against them. The main character thought the word was strange, but admitted that it used to be so. Now he was glad that they had parted ways back then. He spoke calmly, his face relaxed. With that, he left. Wizard was left alone. He threw his hand up helplessly, unable to find the words. He reminded himself aloud that they had abandoned him and were now reaping the consequences. A guard called out to him, asking him to answer a few questions. The man muttered that it was his own fault for acting like a fool. Guards, warriors, and mages stood before him. Thoughts continued to swirl in his head. He agreed with Teihen's words. It was for the best that they had parted ways. Teihen would not have to go through the same thing they had. At the Adventurers Guild, Teihen received his reward by check. Everything around him seemed to shimmer and sparkle. The total reward for the quest was 14,000 coins. His share was 9,000 coins, including a bonus for dangerous conditions. If you count it by days, one day brought in about 2,300 coins. In terms of profit, such quests were more lucrative than selling potions, but the risk of dying was not worth the money. Teihen sat on a bench, looking at the coin and thinking about his situation. He didn't even take off his backpack. If he wanted to earn more, he would have to take on monster quests or go down into the dungeons. The image of Wizard's lost leg and the scars on the fingers of the windcutter archer quickly sobered him up. Was Teihen willing to risk everything for money? The answer is obvious. Adventurers don't just take risks for money. Another question arose. Why then does the main character want to be an adventurer? Money is important for a comfortable life, but the pursuit of profit alone deprives one of the enjoyment of life itself. He clenched his fist and pressed it to his chest. A slight blush appeared on his cheeks. The main character wanted to get pleasure from the life of an adventurer, not profit. His immediate goal was a safe and easy adventure, if such a thing even existed. Teihen headed for the stables in search of a carriage that would take him to the capital. On the stone square, a woman's voice caught up with him. A guild employee called his name, trying to catch up with him. The girl ran up to the adventurer at full speed and informed him that someone very important wished to see Teihen. Behind a heavy oak door, opposite the young man, on an expensive upholstered sofa, sat Lady Famiri. She was fanning herself. The main character asked what she was doing there. The question went unanswered. The lady said she had a request. She literally radiated delight and happiness. The lady asked Teihen to take something to where she would indicate. The main character was overcome with doubt. He didn't even like the sound of such a request. He made it clear that even if she asked him, he wasn't sure he could do it. In response, the lady poked him with her finger. Her kindness was replaced by cunning. She reminded him of his duty. Not long ago, he had received the skill of assessment from her as a gift. The lady repeated her request with more urgency. All he had to do was deliver something truly valuable. She added that she relied only on Teihen and that, given his status, he would do just fine. If the protagonist had any doubts, the lady offered to personally verify his strength. She made it clear that he had not just eaten a golden cherry, but that he grew it and ate it every day. Cornered, Teihen waved his hands in front of him, trying to justify himself. He believed that he could not handle such responsibility. In response, Lady Famiri called him stubborn. The head of the Adventurers Guild whispered something in the lady's ear. She liked the advice. Encouraged, she offered a reward. If successful, Teihen's rank would be raised from iron to bronze. There are 4 ranks among adventurers: gold, silver, bronze, and iron. Considering his own weakness, the main character never thought about promotion. Thoughts swirled in his head. He touched his index fingers together and said that it was a great honor for him, but he still did not have enough strength for promotion. The guild master intervened in the conversation. He explained that the guild saw no obstacles to raising his rank if he completed the task. Teihen broke out in a cold sweat from despair. Even the guild master was on Lady Famiri's side. The lady's face became frightening. Her eyes widened, her smile looked bloodthirsty, and her beautiful face promised retribution. She addressed him by name and made it clear that if he refused again, there would be no more leniency. Caught off guard, Teihen accepted the task. Somewhere in the forest, Teihen headed for his destination, complaining that Lady Famiri had insisted on traveling on foot. For his body, it was pure torture. The task was to deliver an egg to a certain mountain. It was the egg of the Dragon Lord mentioned in ancient legends. Someone had stolen it from its nest. After a long search, the egg was found. Now it had to be returned, but the task turned out to be more difficult than it seemed. An unknown group of assassins was hunting for the egg. Several fake couriers were selected, including Teihen. This plan was supposed to confuse the pursuers. But one question remained. Why would the country go to such lengths for a single egg? The main character never got an answer. Long ago, when the kingdom of Belstein was still a small state, it was attacked by the Dragon Lord. His eyes burned with nothing but rage. The progenitor of the kingdom, His Majesty Ryu, fought the dragon for 3 days and 3 nights. Victory went to the king. He spared the Dragon Lord. The latter bowed his head and accepted defeat. Later, it became known that the dragon had come to seek revenge. The inhabitants of Belstein had desecrated the remains of his kin. Upon learning the reason for the dragon's anger, King Ryu asked the Dragon Lord to find the culprit and bring him to justice. In return, he took a promise from the Dragon Lord. If anyone dared to harm the Dragon Clan, the king would settle the matter personally. But if the dragon's kin harmed humans, the dragons would have to deal with it themselves. Thus, an agreement was reached. After that, the dragons did not disturb these lands. Although both sides suffered losses, the difficulties strengthened everyone. Ms. Famiri's father used to say, After rain, the ground hardens. Teihen understood. So, the progenitor of an entire kingdom was Japanese? After rain, the earth hardens is a Japanese proverb. It means that any difficulties along the way make a person stronger. This fully explains why the king wanted rice. The ruler of an entire country, an immortal, beautiful daughter, a whole heroic story. Even though the king and Teihen came from the same country, their paths were radically different. With a feeling of envy, Teihen continued to climb the mountain. Day after day passed. Teihen had been traveling for 2 days. He felt like he was being followed. Trying to outsmart his pursuers, he announced aloud his intention to take a break. No one took the bait. The young man was still full of energy. Thanks to his day wanderer skill, he felt no fatigue or sleepiness. He could sense someone else's presence nearby. Teihen wanted to complete the task as soon as possible. In addition to delivering the egg, he was assigned another role. He was bait for the killers from the criminal organization. They wanted to take the egg for themselves. The knights were following him. They had to capture the pursuers and interrogate them. The anxiety did not let up. Teihen did not sense the presence of the knights. These are the king's knights. The killers can't handle them, right? Of course, that's right. He's just winding himself up. But the feeling did not disappear even at the foot of the mountain. He stood with his hand to his forehead, looking up. He smiled at his own success. There was little left to do. If the old him had been on this mission, such an adventure would have taken much longer. Eating golden cherries every day was paying off. His stats were growing, but his luck was still low. Teihen's analytics suddenly spewed out a message. 2 men appeared out of nowhere, silently. A middle-aged man with a large saber on his shoulder and a headdress. A young man in a crouch, knives sticking out of his bent fingers. A horizontal scar under his left eye crossed the guy's face. The tall man warned. If Teihen wanted to live, he had to hand over the contents of the bag. The man with the weapon turned out to be the killer from the ad. The one the girl was looking for in the guild. Teihen recognized him immediately. He was the one who had attacked Wizard in the carriage. The young man with the knives joked with his elder. Now he was famous. He called him the Sword Demon Ben. In response, he was told to shut up. The name Ben. Teihen knew it. It was the name of his former comrade, the strongest of their old group. Could it really be him? The main character thought that Ben had become the strongest adventurer. He said quietly, now he sees what his former comrade has become. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced his chest. The sword came out of his body. The world turned gray. Teihen didn't have time to do anything. Ben bared his teeth and barked. The main character knows nothing about him. The body collapsed onto the grass. The little killer asked if Ben had killed the performer. He confirmed it. He ordered them to take the egg and leave. They had already finished off the knights, calling them rats in armor. But they couldn't be sure that no one else was following them. Looking into the bag, the killers saw only grass. Ben grumbled. They had been tricked. The younger one described Teihen as a weakling. But he got to the mountain faster than anyone else. Ben replied. The main character was useless then and remained so now. The guy with the scar laughed. He clarified. Is that how he describes his former friends? He remembered that the guy sold healing potions. Ben replied. That explains where Teihen got such good leather armor. The killer's voice became vicious, almost a growl. He continued. Teihen could have sat there, mixing his herbs. But no, he played the hero. And like a fool, he died for it. He pressed his foot down on the lifeless body. His partner gently hinted that it was time to go look for the egg. A voice sounded in Teihen's head. It reported an emergency situation on repeat. The daytime wanderer's skill was forcibly activated. A desire to drink blood flashed through his mind. Teihen's fingers twitched. His hair partially changed color. His fangs lengthened. The only word that came out was blood. As they rummaged through Teihen's small bag, the criminals were indignant at the meager contents of their loot. Angered, Ben noted that they had wasted their time. His companion explained that this incident could have been avoided if his friend had managed to steal the egg on time. It turns out that Wizard had previously provided confidential information to the criminals. When the cab driver realized he had said too much, it was already too late. Laughing at his friend's failure, the blonde-haired young man said that Ben had been extremely unlucky and unfortunate lately. Suddenly, the main character appeared from the forest and eliminated the criminal with a single blow. Overcome with fear, Ben couldn't say a word. Smiling cheekily, Teihen noted that his opponent was a good-for-nothing who was nothing special. Not understanding how his opponent had managed to survive, Ben clutched his weapon tightly in his hands. Trying to strike, he paused for a moment. At that moment, the main character grabbed the sword with his own hands, stopping the blow. However, the criminal overestimated himself. When he realized this, he began to run away quickly. Instantly catching up with his opponent, Teihen continued to laugh. He really enjoyed revenge, as he understood how many tragedies had occurred because of the offender. At that moment, Ben began to shout loudly, saying that the guy couldn't even imagine how difficult the path to the top was. He kept insisting that any mistake could cost him his entire reputation and career. Ben also said that he had to do the most disgusting work in order to feed himself. Remaining completely calm, the main character clarified that he did not care about his enemy's personal drama. Moreover, he reminded them that in the past, young people had chosen this path themselves. Approaching his opponent, Teihen smiled again and said that what was done could not be undone. Understanding the seriousness of the situation, Ben asked for mercy because he had his daughter. It turned out that the child had been living in an orphanage for several years because of her father's lifestyle. He understood how much he was to blame for what was happening in his life. Trying to justify himself, Ben explained that he did all the dirty work only for the sake of his daughter, who needed money. Looking Teihen in the eyes, he said that if his daughter lost her father, she would become a criminal. In addition, Ben explained that Teihen, like no one else, understood what it was like to be abandoned by his family. Smiling, the main character asked if his opponent had thought about leaving the young girl without her older brother. He found the villain's reasoning about life to be very hypocritical. In addition, Teihen noted that the government was offering a large sum of money as a reward for the capture of the offender. Hearing this, Ben lost his composure and attacked the main character. After the attack, Teihen thought about the fact that this was the first time he had inflicted such significant physical damage on another person. What's more, the situation was exacerbated by the fact that this person was once a very close friend who had gone down a slippery slope. When the main character returned to his normal state, he felt a strange emptiness inside himself. He couldn't understand if he had done the right thing. On the one hand, the guy had done something terrible, but on the other, he had neutralized a dangerous criminal. Looking at his hands, the young man was frightened because he felt no guilt at all. Perhaps this was a side effect of using the enhancement. Covering his face with his hands, he realized that almost nothing remained of the criminal. Now he had to decide how to deliver proof of the offender's elimination to the kingdom. Teihen decided to put the surviving fragments in his own inventory. To his surprise, the item was instantly preserved in the game world. It turned out that Teihen himself was the original keeper of the artifact. Knowing that the journey would be dangerous, he prudently hid the valuable item in the game. Things stored there remained in their original condition. The main character was pleased to have such a useful skill. Besides, he remembered the princess's strict warning not to lose the artifact. Clutching the egg in his hands, Teihen breathed a sigh of relief. Now it was time for him to set off on his journey. Suddenly, he noticed the dragon lord in front of him. The majestic creature watched him intently. Then it asked if he was the king's messenger. Teihen was overcome with fear. He immediately handed over the artifact, saying that he had done everything he could. As a reward for returning the egg and getting rid of the criminals, the dragon gave him an answer. Touching the young man's face with its claw, the creature instantly knew both the question and the answer. The dragon explained that Ben had not turned into a vampire after being bitten because he was unworthy of approaching the king. Then he warned Teihen to be careful. It was possible that the vampire bite could spawn offspring. As he took his leave, the dragon lord called the young man the whimsical king of the night. Left alone, Teihen pondered for a long time how the dragon had managed to learn so much about him. Moreover, he was struck by the fact that he had never communicated with the lord before. Returning to the capital, the main character went to the guild. There he was met by a pretty girl. She was genuinely happy to see him back. Thanking her for her warm words, Teihen noted that the journey had not been easy. It turned out that Liberia had been waiting for him because all the grapes had been sold out and customers were demanding a new shipment. Delighted, Teihen thought that after selling a few boxes of grapes, he would be able to buy his own house. Liberia asked if he wanted to sell a few bottles of healing potion. Teihen replied that he intended to meet a blonde girl who had recently lost a loved one. Liberia exclaimed in surprise, "Isn't it scary to meet a noblewoman face to face?" Teihen replied that there was no other way to get the reward. In the office of the Adventurers Guild, the blonde stared at him intently, waiting for a detailed explanation. Teihen was taken aback, for his interlocutor really did look like a fierce warrior. Deciding not to delay, he took out the box. He stated that, according to the terms of the agreement, the criminal had to be delivered in any condition. One of the adventurers shouted loudly, accusing Teihen of deceiving the noblewoman. The main character objected, saying that even though he belonged to the lower ranks, he did not want to listen to insults. Opening the box, he warned that if the captured man did not meet expectations, he would silently leave the guild. The blonde girl ran up to the box and confidently declared that she had no doubts about the authenticity of the evidence. She apologized for her subordinate's rudeness and ordered the guild master to be invited to pay the reward. The noblewoman's advisor was indignant, insisting that someone was trying to deceive the fair-haired lady in order to steal the money. The blonde replied sharply that in that case, the group would go in search of the criminal on their own. The team would not receive water, food, or rest until they found the right person. Teihen mentally noted that the privileged girl knew how to construct a dialogue clearly and inspire fear. The advisor, who had previously accused him of lying, began to apologize for his insolence. Soon, Teihen signed the check. Liberia thanked him for his professional work in eliminating the criminal, but she asked him to stay after the paperwork was done. A fair-haired noblewoman approached him and bowed in gratitude. Introducing herself as Zara Gant Haklasra, she thanked Teihen once again. Then the girl silently left the guild building. Sitting in the lobby at a neat desk, Liberia admitted that she had not expected such a feat from Teihen. The main character noted that he had not imagined that his friend was involved in anything other than evaluating products of the trade guild. Liberia gave him a stern look and said that she was the only one who came to work today. She also explained that some criminals could be considered inanimate objects, just like in the trade guild. Laughing, she added that it was just a bad joke. Teihen thought about how he was surrounded by strong and courageous women. Liberia warned that it was unsafe to walk the streets of the capital with a check in his pocket. She suggested cashing it right away. Teihen was hesitant, as he did not know what to spend such a large sum on. The employee insisted that it would be better to open a safe deposit box at the guild, which would guarantee the safety of his funds. Teihen immediately realized that she was advertising a new state bank. However, he did not object to the proposal. Handing him the papers, Liberia assured him that he would not regret his decision. All he had to do was sign. Teihen interrupted her and explained that he wanted to become an investor and help the orphans in the orphanage. One of the reasons was that the daughter of a former comrade lived in the orphanage. Although he did not feel guilty, he understood that his game character would have done the same. After finishing his business, Teihen topped up his gaming account. Once he was back at the hotel, he began to think. He thought about it. Something continued to bother him. Activating his statistics assessment skill. Teihen was surprised to discover many new abilities. His old skills had improved significantly. For example, he had acquired the skill of silent walking. Teihen could no longer hear his own footsteps. He assumed that by turning into a vampire and eliminating his opponents, he automatically took their abilities. Lying in bed, he wondered whether this was a gift or a curse. He closed his eyes. The main character realized that he did not want to sleep at all and did not feel tired. Still, Teihen decided to drink something to fall asleep as soon as possible. But the game only offered tea, water, and juice. It turns out that in the capital, you have to go to a restaurant or a local shop for alcoholic beverages. After chatting with the shopkeeper for a while, he learned that adventurers returning from the dungeons were selling rare fruits to the townspeople. These fruits are an excellent raw material for alcoholic beverages, which is why the demand for alcohol has fallen. The vendor also recommended dried meat as a snack to the main character. Teihen politely declined and did not mention that he could buy the same products cheaper in his own game store. After buying drinks, he headed to the hotel. At first, Teihen wanted to go to the bar, but there was no one there. He wondered what it would be like to have friends and spend time with them in some metropolitan establishment. Suddenly, it occurred to the main character that he could make strong drinks himself using his skills. The game store had a lot of grapes and other fruit for liqueurs. But Teihen understood that selling such valuable goods would attract unwanted attention from law enforcement and the guild itself. He instinctively turned around. The main character sharply dodged the stranger's blow. Zara's subordinate tried to attack the young man. It turned out that he had been kicked out of the team after recent events and accusations of lying. Teihen was puzzled. However, he believed that the man was to blame for his dismissal, arguing with the lady. Looking for the nearest deserted alley, Teihen thought about a plan to eliminate his opponent. Deciding on a desperate act, Teihen ran toward the small courtyard. The enraged blonde-haired young man rushed after him. Turning the corner, the enemy saw the smiling protagonist with his fangs bared. After a while, he returned to the hotel. The main character checked his stats again. It turned out that as a result of the battle, he had acquired new unique skills, but instead of joy, he felt a paralyzing fear. Teihen realized that he was to blame for deciding to test the theory. It turned out that he had transferred his wounded opponent into the game so that there would be no evidence of the crime. This activated an amazing ability to fertilize crops. Looking at the screen, Teihen bitterly realized that testing the theory had cost him too much. Suddenly, a system notification appeared informing him that he had been assigned a new task: the production of alcohol-containing products. He had to find out the details at the guild's reception desk. This news shocked Teihen. He had previously assumed that he had already completed all possible tasks in the game. However, The system informed him that he needed to collect rare materials to build a winery near his house. It turned out that he needed to obtain wood from Trent and a rare fruit that a shopkeeper nearby had mentioned. He remembered that Trent was a dangerous monster from the dungeon, and that the amazing berries were obtained by adventurers in the same place. Looking at the screen of his device, the main character realized that this time he would have to go to the dungeon on his own. Several days have passed since the new quest appeared. The main character sold potions with fruit, returned to training, and sometimes shared the leftover fruit with the three girls. Life went on as usual, but Teihen knew that sooner or later he would have to continue the quest. However, he liked to procrastinate and put off this task. At the trade guild, he learned that the necessary fruits and trees were not sold in the capital. Clenching his fist, Teihen realized that he would have to go down into the dungeon himself. Looking out the window, he promised himself to set off on his journey as soon as possible. After gathering his things, the main character checked the contents of his backpack once more. His equipment, food, and water supplies were ready. Leaving the house, he realized that his final destination was in the dungeon of a neighboring city. Suddenly, he noticed that those around him had begun whispering. The carriage intended for his journey was already waiting for him. The journey to the dungeon was known to take about 5 days. However, ignoring the carriage, Teihen decided to set off on foot. This decision was motivated by his desire to test his endurance and resistance to physical exertion. During breaks, Teihen, taking his joystick, could not completely relax without his favorite game. He used a towel to freshen up, but soon he noticed that it had become dirty. At that moment, Teihen remembered the mechanics of the game, according to which objects moved into virtual space are instantly cleaned. He thought about the possibility of washing the towel in this way. He noted with regret that this feature did not apply to his own armor. Throughout the journey, the main character did not forget to consume golden cherries, which he knew would improve his game performance. Analyzing his stats, he found that he had significantly improved his skills and increased his endurance level. However, to his disappointment, his luck indicator remained extremely low. After resting from his long journey, Teihen looked at the unfamiliar city with curiosity. The journey on foot took him about 3 days, and he finally found himself in the right place. Teihen, impressed by the architecture of the new houses and the diversity of the local residents, noted that this settlement was on par with the kingdom's capital in terms of development and infrastructure. His first task was to officially register with the local Adventurers Guild. After visiting the registration office, he confirmed his status as a bronze-ranked adventurer. The employee behind the counter provided information about the seasonal characteristics of working in the dungeons. She emphasized that in winter, access to underground locations becomes much more difficult due to a decrease in the number of available jobs and an increase in demand from other adventurers. The main character, taken aback, explained that he had not expected such difficulties. The girl offered to draw up a contract for a long-term stay at a local hotel. She noted that special conditions were provided for members of the Adventurers Guild. Wanting to take advantage of these benefits, the main character agreed to the proposed conditions without delay. Leaving the hotel, Teihen noted that the guild employees increasingly reminded him of consultants in specialty stores. Approaching a large stone arch, he stopped, realizing that he was standing in front of the entrance to the dungeon. Located within the jurisdiction of the ruler of the lands and managed by the Adventurers Guild, Teihen understood that upon entering, he would be required to present a special registration card, and if the employee discovered that the traveler had not previously visited the dungeon, he would be given instructions explaining the rules of operation. The girl at the entrance outlined the main provisions of the rules, including the need to present a registration card and automatic recognition as missing if the adventurer was absent for a month, after which all his belongings would become the property of the guild. After familiarizing himself with all the details, the main character assured his interlocutor of his intention to exercise caution on his journey. Approaching the door and finding himself at the very entrance to the dungeon, Teihen realized that his dream had finally come true and that he was on the threshold of new, unexplored adventures. Analyzing the structure of the underground corridors, the main character came to the conclusion that they had a distinctly labyrinthine configuration. At the same time, he experiences considerable tension, which is a manifestation of his anxiety. The sounds of combat coming from all sides prevent the main character from stopping. Turning around, he discovers a group of 5 goblins in the process of discussing something. Realizing that these creatures are not yet focused on him, Teihen quickly uses his weapon. A few minutes later, all the enemies are defeated. Teihen is surprised to realize that his physical strength has exceeded his own expectations. Upon closer inspection of his surroundings, he discovers several stones, which turn out to be the product of the transformation of monsters' bodies into magical artifacts. It is known that many adventurers seek to penetrate the dungeons precisely for the purpose of obtaining these valuable objects. Teihen, exploring the passages, realizes that these underground structures contain not only magical stones, but also various materials, artifacts, and armor. Holding one of the magic stones in his hands, he thinks about the potential limits of his activities in the context of hunting goblins. Nevertheless, Teihen prefers to focus on the idea of a safe and exciting journey, avoiding possible dangers. The main character realizes the need to remain highly vigilant and avoid hasty decisions. Suddenly, he notices a small portal resembling a doorway. It provides the opportunity to return to the starting point of the dungeon or move to the previous floor. Taking a step to the side, he notes that he has enough information for now. Sometime later, Teihen strolls through the city streets, assessing his earnings from the sale of magic stones in the amount of 300 coins. This income seems insignificant to him compared to the effort he put into the battle. Realizing the need to increase his income, he understands that this will require descending to deeper levels of the dungeons. However, he also realizes that on more difficult levels, it will be difficult for him to deal with monsters alone, which presents him with new challenges and tasks. At that moment, Teihen heard strange sounds, as if someone nearby was expressing their dissatisfaction. Memories of the reasons for his death in real life made him refrain from interfering in the conflict between strangers. The girl, who was extremely frightened during this verbal exchange, instinctively decided to hide behind the main character. The dissatisfied man, realizing that his attempt to involve the main character in the conflict had been unsuccessful, expressed his discontent. He noted that adventurers should not interfere in matters that did not concern them. Moreover, the insolent man clearly intended to physically harm the main character. However, the latter was not at all satisfied with this outcome. Grabbing the attacker's fist, the protagonist diplomatically suggested resolving the situation peacefully. Despite all his efforts, the stranger was unable to overcome the main character, whose new skills and abilities allowed him to effectively resist the aggression. Taking the girl with him, the man declared that it was time for them to leave. Returning to the hotel, the main character decided to have a light dinner and to rest before the upcoming day, which promised to be eventful in the dungeon. The next morning, as he approached the guild, he noticed two young women who ran up to him. These girls expressed their gratitude for being saved on the street and informed him that they were a mage and a priestess. Realizing the power of the main character, they offered him cooperation, seeking to combine their efforts to achieve common goals. The main character was amazed by such an unusual proposal. He pondered the advisability of joining forces with the two young women. However, he did not fully understand what tasks would be assigned to him as part of their joint activities. Despite his intention to refuse to participate in the journey, under the pressure of their arguments and charm, he accepted their offer and introduced himself. A blonde girl who introduced herself as Misha said she was a third-generation hereditary sorceress from an aristocratic family based on the principles of meritocracy. She had come to the city to gain practical experience. Her dark-haired companion, Sis, introduced herself as a priestess raised in a temple. The girls clarified that they were friends in the magical arts, but their magical systems differed significantly. Sis explained that the magical system has two main attributes, demonic and holy, and all other derivative attributes are formed by combining these. Thus, Sis is an offensive mage, while Misha specializes in support. Misha also noted that pure magic, often referred to as divine, has a negative reputation in society. The main character, observing his companions, noted their contrasting personalities. Misha was more talkative, while Sis was more reserved. Teihen, introducing himself as an adventurer from the capital, shared his plans to try his hand in a new place. However, he decided not to reveal information about his gaming achievements and herb cultivation. Misha and Sis found his story boring and did not show much interest in it. At the girl's suggestion, Teihen agreed to go to the dungeon. Before the expedition began, he returned to the hotel to update his equipment. Appearing before his companions in new armor, he showed them his mace and shield, surprising them. The girls noted that in case of unforeseen circumstances, he risked losing all his valuable items. Teihen, however, reminded them of the reserves he had prepared in advance, which they did not know about. In the labyrinths of the dungeon, the girls expressed their dissatisfaction with the lack of goblins for them. This was unusual for Teihen. As they descended into the dungeon, the variety of enemies and the intensity of the battles increased. Sis, fighting a monster, turned to Misha for help. Teihen, using his strength, destroyed one of the weapons, surprised by his own power. He realized that his combat abilities had improved significantly compared to the past. After analyzing his stats, Teihen discovered that his performance significantly exceeded that of the guild instructor. This strengthened his confidence. During the further descent, he suggested that his companions take a break and continue on their way. However, they said they were exhausted and didn't want to continue. Misha burst into tears, expressing her desire to return home, as the sight of goblins caused her anxiety and fear. Analyzing the condition of the exhausted girls, the main character realized that he currently had the resources to continue the battle. Nevertheless, he concluded that he had already accumulated a significant amount of magic stones and that it might be best to stop. Hearing a satisfactory answer, Misha and Sis expressed sincere joy and hurried to the exit. At the guild, they exchanged the magic stones for cash. It turned out that each participant in the battle received about 20,000 coins. Teihen smiled as he thought about the prospects of increasing his income in the future. His thoughts were interrupted by Misha, who, saying goodbye, clarified that the next meeting would take place only in a week. He was stunned. The main character expressed his dissatisfaction with such a schedule of meetings and expeditions. Sis explained that they needed to focus on purchasing supplies for magical rituals. She noticed a question in the main character's eyes. She explained that there are two main methods of learning magic. The first is to study magical practices under the guidance of another magician, and the second is to acquire the necessary components for witchcraft in specialized guilds. Both methods allow magical mechanisms to be imprinted on the mind in the form of magic circles. The main character remembered that he had previously observed something similar when acquiring his assessment skill. However, Misha noted that after mastering magical practices, it is impossible to immediately apply them in battle, especially offensive magic, which requires instant and accurate reactions. She explained that all magicians need constant training and adaptation to their own magical characteristics. For example, holy magic directly depends on the strength of interaction with divine beings, which is why Sis regularly attends church to pray. After listening to his friends, the main character realized that he had often witnessed conflicts between mages and warriors, and now he understood the reasons for this. Despite understanding the situation, he was not satisfied with such long terms. Crossing his fingers, Teihen asked the girls to shorten the waiting period. However, they said that this was impossible, as they needed time for prayers and preparation. The main character expressed his dissatisfaction. He warned that if the situation did not change, he would go on his travels without them and might lose interest in their company. Once at the hotel, he reflected on his guilt for being rude to the girls, but he was angry with them for asking for a favor without being willing to compromise. He found solace in delicious food, particularly golden cherries. Assessing his stats, he was surprised to find that all indicators were growing except for luck, which remained low. He assumed that this was due to his surroundings. Sitting on his bed, Teihen reflected on his original intention to explore the dungeons alone. Realizing this, he decided to use his best equipment, a full set of iron armor, and he promised himself to go as far as possible. In the context of researching game mechanics and the dynamics of character interaction with the environment, attention should be paid to the case described in the 6th level of the dungeon. In this episode, Teihen demonstrates outstanding abilities to effectively counter various monsters of varying degrees of difficulty. This fact testifies to his high level of training and adaptability to gaming challenges. On the 3rd day of his journey, thanks to the use of new weapons, the main character demonstrates the impeccable accuracy and effectiveness of his attacks. High-quality armor protects him from bites and arrows, compensating for his lack of mobility. New skills allow him to successfully overcome obstacles, which emphasizes the importance of a strategic approach to the gameplay. The main character's ability to continue playing the game in solitude deserves special attention. This indicates his high level of self-organization and internal motivation. However, despite his confidence in his abilities, the main character is cautious, constantly looking around so as not to miss the appearance of dangerous creatures. Using the joystick allows the main character to add magic stones to his inventory. After finishing his meal, the main character sets off again, demonstrating his readiness to continue exploring the dungeon. Standing at a massive door, Teihen ponders the meaning of this. One assumption is that one of the bosses is hiding behind the door. This causes the main character to feel fear and anxiety. However, he decides to face his fear head-on. Opening the door, he finds himself in a room filled with goblins and other creatures. Faced with a crowd, the main character uses the Day Wanderer skill, which, in his opinion, can be effective not only against humans, but also against magical creatures. However, after activating the skill, he takes off his heavy metal armor. Thanks to his quick reflexes, the main character successfully dodges the evil goblin's attack and eliminates his enemies one by one. In his vampire form, He emphasizes his uniqueness and superiority over ordinary people, considering himself a being who manipulates the lives of others and awards himself whatever he wants. After completing the task in the boss's room, the system notifies Teihen that the skill has been successfully disabled. The main character, relying on his deep knowledge of vampirism, suggested that the daytime vagrant has a personality capable of making decisions about his behavior. This assumption was based on the fact that vampires possess secret techniques that have remained unknown to the general public for centuries. At that moment, Teihen remembered his stats. After loading the latest data, he discovered that his stats had reached their maximum level. The increase in the number of skills allowed Teihen to notice that their application was not limited to humans. Moreover, he discovered a new skill of seduction. Embarrassed, Teihen realized that he had never had a romantic relationship with a girl, and therefore this skill seemed completely useless to him. Picking up the magic stones from the floor, Teihen anticipated how much money he could get for them. Suddenly, he noticed a bag lying on the floor. Assuming that the bag had magical properties since it was next to the stones, he discovered that its main advantage was its ability to hold a huge number of items. This proved to be extremely valuable to the main character, as he could not always use his joystick, especially in the presence of other people. After trying on the bag, he was surprised to find that it fit him perfectly. Teihen also decided to immediately test all the skills he had acquired in battle. First, he decided to try out the fire arrow. As Misha had previously noted, magic is worthless if you don't know how to use it. However, the arrow fired by Teihen hit a completely different place. By that point, he realized that almost a whole week had passed, and it was time to prepare for the meeting with his friends. Nevertheless, Teihen preferred to work alone, even though he easily found common ground with others and progressed through the levels much faster when in company. Visiting the guild early in the morning, the main character saw his acquaintances nearby. Apologizing, Misha said that they no longer wished to cooperate with the main character. Next to the girls stood a young man in beautiful armor, who also apologized to Teihen, mentioning that it was completely accidental. However, Teihen was interested in why they had decided to exclude him from the team. Looking questioningly at her companion, Sis confirmed that the new warrior looked much stronger and better. After a short pause, the main character smiled and said that it would indeed be better for everyone. Taking their new friend by the hands, the girls laughed and said they were heading to the dungeon. Waving goodbye to the guys, Teihen felt someone pat him on the shoulder. The stranger, trying to cheer the guy up, noted that young people today are too selfish. Not understanding what was going on, the main character said that he didn't need any support at the moment. In addition, he realized that his mind had become much stronger and more confident, and the problem of indecision had disappeared. The stranger continued to talk about his experience working in groups, but the main character, responding in monosyllables, wanted to end the conversation in front of all the townspeople. Standing at the reception desk in the guild, the main character announced his intention to exchange the precious stones for cash. A pretty employee suggested putting all the stones on a small plate. Before he could finish speaking, she noticed a bowl full of jewels. She counted all the items. The girl assured him that Teihen could expect a reward of 600,000 coins. Stunned by such a large fee, Teihen asked if he could collect the entire amount at once. After answering in the affirmative, the employee asked him to bring stones a little more often. The man standing in line patted Teihen on the shoulder. He remarked that Teihen had done a truly amazing job. Smiling, the main character thought about how he would have reacted with caution before, but now it was much easier for him to communicate with strangers. This was a real achievement for a person who had always been excluded from all groups. At the end of an eventful day, the main character, guided by a deeply ingrained habit, believes that the end of the day should be marked by an exquisite gastronomic experience. This time, he chose a juicy pork chop accompanied by a delicate egg cooked in chicken broth. Combined with rice, this culinary work of art helped to level out negative emotions and restore mental balance. After dinner, taking advantage of the opportunity to finish the inventory early, Teihen allowed himself to enjoy a well-deserved rest. Waking up the next morning, he felt physically exhausted as a result of his nighttime immersion in virtual reality. With no specific plans for the day, he decided to visit a local tavern located near the hotel. During the meal, his attention was drawn to the unusual excitement among the visitors. It was caused by the appearance of two groups of adventurers, the Feathers of Steel and Flameblade. The main character, observing these groups, noted their youth and high level of discipline. He was particularly drawn to a white-haired girl whose appearance reminded him of a previous encounter with an adventurer who had been pursuing Ben. After visiting the tavern, the main character realized the need to gather information about Trent, as well as prepare for a descent into the dungeon in order to acquire magical artifacts. However, Given the complexity of the task, he came to the conclusion that it would be advisable to cooperate with one of the aforementioned groups of adventurers. Leaving the tavern, the main character approached the girl behind the bar and asked her about Trent's location. He learned that they lived on the 30th floor of the dungeon, which was extremely dangerous for beginners. He also learned about the record for conquering the 40th floor. The girl offered him the opportunity to cooperate with the guild, which could greatly facilitate the completion of the task. Upon visiting the Magic Guild, the main character was greeted by a pretty girl wearing glasses. She provided him with the necessary explanations regarding the system of acquiring magic spells. She emphasized that the cost of spells depends on the rank assigned on the registration card, and offered her help in case of difficulties. The main character chose spells based on his previous experience in games. As a result, he acquired 7 spells, which cost 300,000 coins. The procedure of imprinting the magic circle in his mind was accompanied by severe physical discomfort. This made him doubt the advisability of further magical experiments. However, despite this, the main character decided to test his new abilities. He cast a spell that caused a glow. This moment became a symbol for him of the significant changes that had taken place since he began his journey as an adventurer. He realized that, despite all the difficulties and trials, his life would never be the same again. Driven by a desire for self-improvement and professional growth, the main character decided to visit a training ground where a significant number of adventurers were constantly honing their skills. During his stay at the site, he witnessed a lively dialogue between 2 strangers discussing the plans of 2 elite groups of adventurers, Feathers of Steel and Flameblade, to recruit new members for an upcoming descent to the 30th floor of the dungeon. Teihen, lost in thought, realized that his own ambitions coincided with the goals of these groups, and he wanted to join them. However, he understood that professional adventurers had high standards for candidates. He also realized that his friendship with Misha and Sis, despite all the circumstances, remained important to him. Nevertheless, he tried not to dwell on the past and focused on preparing for the upcoming test. Loneliness gave him a unique opportunity to manage his time and resources for thorough preparation. The next day, early in the morning, Teihen was already in the dungeon. Having transformed and activated his abilities, he was ready to descend to the 30th floor, relying on his skills and spells to overcome dangers. Fighting magical creatures, he demonstrated his mastery of defensive spells and weapon enhancement. However, upon reaching a certain point, he encountered the disappearance of the staircase leading to the upper floors, which became an unexpected obstacle in his path. At that moment, a loud sound indicated the approach of a new enemy. A blonde girl in armor found herself in an extremely vulnerable position, fighting an unknown creature in black robes. This creature turned out to be a punishing devourer, appearing as a result of violating the prohibitions of the dungeon, such as staying on one level for too long or destroying structures. The devourer was surrounded by a cloud of poisonous gas capable of dissolving anything in seconds. Teihen, realizing the need to help the girl, rushed to her at the last moment. He saved her life by shielding her from the side's blow. The damage inflicted allowed him to assess the power of the creature that had left marks on his armor. At that moment, he learned that the girl was a member of the Feathers of Steel group, which added a new aspect to his mission. Not knowing what to do next, he gently leaned over the girl, ready for the new challenges and trials that awaited him ahead. The main character, in a state of deep reflection, realized that his instinctive reaction to protect the girl was dictated more by an emotional impulse than by a rational analysis of the situation. At that moment, he was in a state of cognitive dissonance, with no clear idea of what to do next. Teihen was also puzzled by the lack of information about the whereabouts of the other members of the Feathers of Steel Association and the reasons for their inability to defeat the enemy collectively. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to the devourer, rapidly approaching him with the intention of delivering another blow. Realizing the criticality of the situation and the lack of time to make decisions, Teihen began to activate his Day Wanderer skill. However, upon completing the transformation, he was surprised to find that he was unable to make the exchange with the vampire. He was surprised to find that he had failed to exchange with the vampire. With a slight smile on his face, he looked at his enemy, realizing that he now had to defeat him on his own, without any outside help. Making an internal commitment to show maximum concentration and determination, the main character rushed into battle, striking with a special skill. To his surprise, the attack did not have the expected effect on the devourer. Realizing the complexity of the confrontation, he began to analyze the situation, understanding that in this context, physical attacks were not an effective means. In light of this, he came to the conclusion that only magical methods could be used to successfully counter the punishing devourer. Watching the creature's chaotic movements around the hall, he realized that if he enveloped his sword in magical energy, it would create a powerful psychological barrier for the monster. Having made the decision to attack, he activated his quick step skill and began to prepare his defensive mechanisms. Assuming the possible origin of the creature, Teihen used his entire arsenal of known magic spells, seeking to deliver a decisive blow. At the climactic moment, his sword pierced the air with precision, crushing the seemingly invincible enemy. However, despite the victory, the main character was disappointed by the lack of additional reinforcements or valuable materials left behind after the battle. Realizing the need to ensure the blonde's safety, he picked her up and hurried to leave the dangerous place. Despite the inconvenience of moving in armor, he had no other choice. After a while, he took the blonde to the hospital and returned to the hotel. He spent 3 days recovering his strength, then decided to visit the nearest restaurant. While eating, he thought about how nice it would be to share this pleasure with friends. The main character unwittingly overheard a confidential conversation taking place at the next table. They were discussing a situation in which Ilya, a member of the elite Feathers of Steel unit, had nearly suffered critical physical injury while exploring a dungeon. One of the interlocutors mentioned that an unknown savior had taken the unconscious girl to the hospital. Ilya, upon regaining consciousness, made active attempts to identify her benefactor. The conversation also touched on the physical characteristics of the mysterious hero. He was described as a warrior clad in heavy armor who displayed outstanding combat skills, managing to single-handedly defeat a powerful punishing devourer. The hero came to be known as the Iron Bastion, which caused Teihen to experience shock and growing anxiety. He had no idea that Ilya could have witnessed his transformation into a daytime monster. Rumors of the unknown hero spread with incredible speed, and now everyone was involved in the search for him. Ilya entered the restaurant and surveyed the young people present with a fierce expression on her face. Teihen himself expressed a desire to meet a person with such outstanding abilities. Leaning over the table, Teihen heard Ilya questioning the restaurant patrons about the location of the Iron Bastion. He hurriedly left his seat with a tray of food, but he was stopped by her question. Ilya described her savior as a physically fit man. This allowed Teihen to excuse himself without giving himself away and say that he knew nothing about what had happened. Once in the hotel, Teihen reflected on Ilya's condition, realizing that he had not only carried her out of the dungeon, but also used his own magical abilities to heal her. Holding a game controller in his hands, he ironically recalled the nickname Iron Bastion that he had earned among the people. He understood that he needed to stop using iron armor to avoid being recognized, but he was attracted to the feeling of security it provided. He decided not to think about the consequences until his identity was revealed. Teihen began to make new armor. He used improved materials, steel, and also made a sturdy shield. These precautions significantly increased his protection compared to his previous equipment, although they made him look even more like a wanted man. Descending to the 17th floor of the dungeon, Teihen noticed the variety of creatures he encountered, but this did not bother him, as his protection met all safety requirements. While traveling through the dungeon, he was more interested in the skills he acquired during combat. He discovered that he had acquired skills for the axe, spear, and shield, which was a useful addition. However, he realized that in order to progress, he needed to acquire skills from new types of monsters. Otherwise, his development would be halted. Having decided to continue fighting, Teihen continued on his way. He encountered a drawback in that all the monsters up to the 20th floor were monotonous. In a burst of excitement, he descended directly to the 20th floor to face the boss. The monster's tactic of endless summons proved exhausting, but Teihen was victorious and destroyed this source of evil. For defeating one of the strongest bosses, he was rewarded with a large boo from the general, which significantly increased his attack range. Feeling hungry, the main character thought about his upcoming meal. For lunch, he chose soup, a sandwich, and a salad with bacon and tomatoes. And for dessert, he chose decapon. During the game, the elderly character's soul left the virtual world under a tree, symbolizing decapon fruit. Teihen, in turn, ate these fruits. It is noteworthy that the fruits themselves had a high vitamin content, which served as the basis for introducing a seedling of this tree into the game ecosystem. Having tasted the fruit himself, Teihen noted its superiority, emphasizing that thanks to effective fertilization, the taste of the fruit had become richer and more pleasant. After finishing the meal, the main character returned to the system window with the stats. Despite a significant improvement in physical characteristics, the luck parameter remained at the same level. Nevertheless, Teihen decided to try out a new summoning skill by activating a magic spell. As a result, a white crescent wolf materialized in front of him, a ghostly creature with snow-white fur and sharp fangs. touching the animal's fur. The main character remembered his childhood desire to have his own house and puppy, realizing that he still had to save a considerable amount of money to buy a house and furnish it. Teihen thought about the possibility of creating an alcoholic beverage that could bring him additional income. After some time, the main character found himself on the 21st floor of the dungeon. Looking around, he noticed a strange phenomenon, a blue sky stretching above the ground. This phenomenon defied logical explanation, as its presence underground seemed impossible. The purpose of his visit to this location was to find Trent. During his journey through the forest, Teihen encountered many new monsters, which gave him satisfaction. That is, until he realized that these creatures did not provide any new skills. After another battle, the exhausted Teihen sat down on the ground, admiring the sky and dreaming of a place to rest, similar to home. Suddenly, a tree house appeared in front of him, offering rental accommodation for 6 hours for 1 magic stone. Surprised by this discovery, the main character decided to check it out. Inserting the magic stone into a box next to the house, he became wary, suspecting a possible catch, given that safe zones in the dungeon are rare. However, upon entering, he discovered a cozy environment, a large soft bed, kitchen utensils, and a dining table. He discovered a cozy environment, a large soft bed, kitchen utensils, and a dining table. Lying on the bed, Teihen felt a sense of security. However, after a few seconds, his arms and legs were enveloped by roots, causing him to panic. He thought that this amazing house might be a trap. However, the creature threw him out of the house, and Teihen realized that his rental time had expired. Pulling himself together and putting on his armor, the main character continued his journey. After wandering through the forest for a long time, he discovered a portal, which, as it turned out, was located throughout the forest, speeding up movement between floors. Tired and hungry, Teihen decided that the next time he found a portal, he would use it to return home. Passing through unfamiliar terrain, he stepped on the root of a giant tree. Looking up, he saw Trent. The main character, using his assessment skill, finally identified the creature he was looking for, a plant monster named Trent, inhabiting the forest. Its massive, moisture-saturated body, made of rare wood, possessed a high degree of physical stability and aggressive behavior, characterized by sweeping attacks with branches similar to clubs. At the moment of the first attack, Ossan, using his upgraded shield, realized that despite its impressive size, the enemy had a high attack speed. Remembering the weakness of wood to fire, the main character activated his magical ability, launching a fire arrow. However, the collision with the damp surface of the trunk caused the flame to extinguish immediately, which proved to be a fatal mistake. Realizing that physical attacks and fire spells were ineffective, he decided to focus on strengthening his cutting blows. But all attempts were in vain due to the creature's ability to regenerate quickly. After analyzing the situation, the main character came to the conclusion that a different tactic was needed. Taking advantage of a sudden attack and a quick step, he delivered a crushing blow to the vulnerable spot that Trent was trying to hide. Eliminating the monster, which possessed a high degree of resistance, required considerable effort. As a result of the successful operation, a small log was formed at the battle site. It was later integrated into the game space. After reviewing the game notifications, the main character began to develop a strategy for completing the task of finding 9 similar copies. Continuing his journey through the dungeons, he realized that at the current pace of the mission, the task could be completed in a few days. However, realizing the need for additional effort, he faced the problem of a lack of the necessary monsters. After several days of intensive searching, Teihen noticed that his greed sensor, a game phenomenon, was not calming down. This phenomenon is characterized by an inverse proportionality between the degree of desire to obtain an item and the probability of it dropping. Deciding to take a break, the hero headed for a familiar house, dreaming of 6 hours of rest. However, despite the rest, he was unable to regain his strength, which led to the decision to search for portals to return home. During the search, the main character encountered a giant dragon, known as Wood's Eater. It was the guardian of the underground tiers, possessing a stone shell and the ability to regenerate. Suddenly, the monster turned its gaze toward the main character. The protagonist, in turn, began to develop a strategy to minimize unwanted contact with this magical creature, which possessed outstanding physical characteristics. After a few minutes of running at full speed, Teihen began to analyze his surroundings. He managed to avoid a collision with the monster, but its location remained uncertain. A ghostly knight approached Teihen, whose armor possessed unique properties that allowed him to exist in the physical world. Analyzing his new opponent, Teihen came to the conclusion that he was once again facing a ghost, and therefore would not be able to extract valuable skills or abilities to increase his stats. Nevertheless, Teihen allowed for the possibility of testing one of his hypotheses. Summoning the Crescent Wolf, he watched the situation, hoping for a successful interaction between the two supernatural beings. A plan began to form in his mind. While the wolf distracted the enemy, he would activate his magic to finish what he had started. However, a few moments later, Teihen was stunned to discover that the knight's attack had pierced his steel armor. Nevertheless, he understood that he needed to be much more careful in battle, despite his rapid regeneration thanks to his unique abilities. The Crescent Wolf ran up to the main character and brought the enemy's weapon in its teeth. It was a sword of phantom poison, with flames on its blade that could ignore any defense. In addition, the wolf easily found the portal leading to the exit from the dungeon. Praising his loyal friend, Teihen managed to escape from the dungeon, remaining intact and unharmed. After that, for some unknown reason, the guild master, having exchanged the magic stones for money, summoned Teihen for a private conversation. The man suggested that the main character was resorting to the services of others to obtain large quantities of stones. Teihen apologized and said that he really did all the work himself. In response, the guild master slammed his fist on the table and said that Teihen had no right to lie within the guild. Moreover, he said that he had information about Teihen's past thanks to the testimony of an adventurer. It turned out that for many years Teihen had been an iron-ranked adventurer, engaged exclusively in gathering herbs and selling them. Suddenly, according to the guild master, he was promoted to copper rank and began participating in dungeon raids. Teihen agreed with the suspicious remarks. He realized that he himself would have asked questions if he were in his interlocutor's place. However, he understood that if he listened silently to the accusations, he could be branded guilty by the entire guild. Then Teihen began his story by saying that until recently he had been an ordinary and unremarkable adventurer, but it was at this age that he discovered his strengths. He recounted how he had achieved considerable heights after developing his magical abilities and skills. Putting his hand on his heart, he declared that he had obtained all the magic stones himself. Stunned by what he heard, the man informed his assistant that Teihen did not understand what he was saying. He asked his companion to call the Thunderlight group, an experienced group that had conquered the 10th floor of the dungeon. Suddenly, Misha, Sis, and their friend entered the room. The girls greeted the guild master and their old acquaintance. The main character was surprised to meet his friends. The guild master informed him that Teihen was suspected of fraud against the guild and that they had all once worked in the same group. He asked the Thunderlight squad to evaluate Teihen's abilities. To do this, they would hold a training battle in which the main character would fight against the Thunderlight group. The winner of the battle would receive a reward in the form of all the valuable crystals obtained in the dungeon. Misha and Sis agreed to the terms. They also asked their friend to admit defeat now, while he was still safe and sound. In order to demonstrate his strength and refute negative rumors, Teihen entered into a training match against the Thunderlight group. The judge asked if the parties were ready. He received an affirmative answer. At the beginning of the battle, Teihen lightningly knocked the weapons out of his opponent's hands. This caused confusion and bewilderment among the guys. Teihen, demonstrating his superiority in tactics and strategy, emphasized that his actions were predictable and explainable. At that moment, Misha, one of the group members, warned her friend about the need to remain vigilant and called on all group members to use their magic to its fullest potential. The Thunderlight group responded by intensifying their attacks on the main character. Teihen, assessing the situation, decided to counterattack. He used basic magic spells, including light, and a shield strike, which threw the Thunderlight group back a considerable distance. After the battle ended, when his opponents refused to continue, the guild master declared Teihen the winner. In his address to the group members, Teihen emphasized that arrogance and indifference to the feelings of others inevitably lead to downfall. Entering the guild master's office, Teihen witnessed his request for forgiveness. Teihen, expressing his desire to leave the guild, noted that the resolution of the conflict was favorable. He also acknowledged that the guild master was right in considering him an adventurer of the iron rank. However, he emphasized that he had already freed himself from this situation. Inside, he felt a deep elation that he could barely contain in front of those around him. The guild master, handing over the check, noted that the amount of the reward exceeded the reward for capturing Ben by more than twice. He emphasized that this was the least he could offer such a talented adventurer as Teihen. He also added that the amount was an apology and gratitude for his service to the guild. Suddenly, Ilya interrupted the conversation as she entered the office. Apologizing for her interruption, she asked permission to enter. Taking Teihen by the hand, she thanked him for saving her and asked if he was the Iron Bastion. Confused, Teihen did not understand how his identity had been revealed. Ilya, with her deep knowledge of intelligence analysis, told him about how she had followed the trail of evidence about a suspicious individual clad in heavy armor who had been spotted in the guild tavern, which had allowed them to track him down. She also noted that Teihen had used a light skill in the training battle that was identical to the one she had sensed in the anomalous void. She had no intention of misleading Ilya. The main character expressed sincere interest in her intentions. At that moment, the leader of Steel Wing, named Jean, entered the room, apologizing for the disturbance and expressing his gratitude for saving his comrade in arms. He also bowed his head to Teihen, expressing his desire to thank him for his heroism. Embarrassed, Teihen objected that his actions did not deserve such high praise. However, Jean emphasized the importance of his actions after the clash with the invincible creature. Jean explained that his intention was not complete, as he wished to invite Teihen to join their elite squad. Unable to believe what was happening, Teihen expressed doubt about his suitability for the role. However, Jean reminded him of Ilya's insistence and his own observations of the protagonist's skills in the training battle. He also asked him to listen to his request as a parting gift before retiring. Jean announced that he intended to retire after defeating his longtime enemy, the Woods Eater, on the 30th floor. Teihen, realizing the significance of this mission, thought about the possibility of joining the elite group and the potential that this expedition could offer. He also realized that defeating a powerful enemy could open up new opportunities, including the acquisition of a new skill. With his hand on his heart, Teihen accepted Jin's offer, realizing that such an opportunity might never come again. Jean thanked him for his quick response and suggested moving on to discussing the terms of the contract for the temporary group intended for the Big Hunt. The contract clearly spelled out all the terms and rewards, including the requirement to give Teihen priority in obtaining Trent fruit and wood. The secretary noted that the originals of the document would be kept safely in the guild. The leader of the group informed Teihen of an upcoming meeting with the Flame Blade group in a week, after which they would begin their expedition. Extending his hand, the leader expressed his confidence in Teihen's cooperation. Teihen promised not to let them down. Going down to the first floor, he asked a girl he knew to transfer the money from the check to his account, thus completing the preparations for the upcoming adventure. The girl at the reception desk bowed her head respectfully to Teihen and apologized for the inconvenience caused by the guild. The main character felt awkward watching everyone around him trying to curry favor with him. In addition, he realized that he really shouldn't have brought so many magic stones at once. The girl noted that she had been closely watching Teihen work and trained diligently all this time. She added that she would continue to believe in his abilities. When Teihen arrived at the hotel, he was lost in thought, thinking that the time had come for his long-awaited rest. However, because everyone around him had high hopes for him, he felt a special responsibility for his actions. Then the main character decided to get the necessary fruit himself and complete the task. Based on information previously obtained from other adventurers, Teihen knew that a treehouse located next to a large rock would serve as his landmark. He had to move along the left side of the forest. Guided by the stories of the Steel Wing team, Teihen set off in search of a fruit called Drunken Dream. The main character studied the map carefully, but he wasn't entirely sure if he was on the right track. Soon, his attention was drawn to a demonic spider spinning a web on one of the trees. This creature was known for patiently waiting for its prey in its webs, and the sticky threads posed a major danger to anyone who dared to approach. Hiding in the bushes, Teihen knew that he should not approach the magical creature. Fortunately, he had the general's long bow and some recently purchased arrows with him. This equipment was perfect for fighting such an enemy. Although Teihen was using this weapon for the first time, he had no doubt about his success thanks to his skill in adjusting his aim. He succeeded on his first attempt. However, Teihen realized that hitting a vulnerable spot was not an easy task. In addition, he had to keep an eye on his limited supply of arrows. Reflecting on the battle, Teihen remembered an archer from the Windcutter squad who skillfully managed his forces in combat. The arrows themselves were a very expensive consumable that quickly ran out during battle. If he made them in the game, he might not have enough wood for materials, and he didn't want to use the trees from the orchard that Teihen had worked so hard to grow. Lost in these thoughts, Teihen suddenly found himself in the thickest part of the forest, surrounded by a multitude of trees suitable for making the necessary arrows. Thanks to his chopping blows and the axe he had taken from the game, Teihen managed to chop enough wood. Resting after his hard work, the main character smiled as he thought about how he hadn't thought of such a simple solution to the problem before. Suddenly, a punishing devourer appeared in the forest, intending to attack the main character. Teihen instantly jumped to his feet, realizing that he had unwittingly broken the rule of the dungeon and ruined its appearance. After a while, the enemy was defeated. However, Teihen noticed that one creature was always followed by others. Having overcome all difficulties, Teihen continued on his way, remaining in full uniform. He reached his goal. The main character fixed his gaze on the coveted fruit, but then he noticed that the plant was moving. It turned out that underneath it was hiding an armored crocodile, which lures its prey with fruit growing right on its head. The beast's skin was incredibly tough, and it was massive in size. The main character understood that the appearance of a mini-boss before the coveted reward could be considered a kind of golden classic of such games. He noted that the crocodile fully lived up to its name, as its skin was indeed very tough. However, Teihen remembered that such enemies often have a weak spot somewhere around their mouth. When the armored crocodile was defeated, Teihen immediately opened the system stats window to check the current indicators. He was pleased to find that his accuracy had increased thanks to his frequent use of the sword in battle. Teihen assumed that there were other conditions for developing and acquiring skills. He wanted to test this theory in practice, as it was much easier to use abilities when they were visualized. Clutching the precious fruit in his hands, Teihen rejoiced. Taking out the joystick, he hurried to hide the item in his inventory so as not to accidentally lose it in the dungeon. Now he only had to obtain 7 items made of Trentwood. However, during his long search, the main character was unable to find a single Trent. Noticing a spider, the main character pondered that the dungeon had its own food chain. Following this logic, the Woods Eater could well use Trent as food. Clutching the joystick in his hand, Teihen reasoned that, based on the creature's name, such an assumption was more than logical. At that moment, he realized that he had another compelling reason to eliminate this unusual turtle. Until the day of the planned expedition to the dungeon, Teihen tried unsuccessfully to find Trent on his own, but all his attempts were unsuccessful. Since the main journey was scheduled for the next day, the main character decided to return to the city. Once in the park, he intended to visit the guild before going to the hotel. After completing the exchange of magic stones, a familiar girl at the reception desk informed him that all the money owed to him would be transferred to his bank account. Sitting down on a bench, Teihen unwittingly overheard a conversation between strangers who were discussing him. They looked at the man with suspicion and expressed the opinion that a person with such an unremarkable appearance was hardly capable of any feats. However, one of the interlocutors explained to the others that this very Iron Bastion constantly brought a large number of magic stones to the guild after each visit to the dungeon. Listening to these words, Teihen realized that even positive attention from those around him did not flatter him, but rather caused him some embarrassment. After a while, the main character was invited to the guild, where he was told the long-awaited news of his promotion. Based on his achievements, including a successful training battle and the total amount of items handed in, and in full accordance with the guild's charter, his adventurer status was raised from copper to silver. Holding his new registration card in his hands, the main character couldn't quite believe what was happening. Even after several hours, it all seemed like nothing more than a wonderful dream. At that moment, he finally realized that thanks to his gaming skills, poverty was definitely not a threat to him. This confidence was reinforced by the fact that daily consumption of golden cherries steadily increased his stats. And thanks to the gift of the day Wanderer, he could acquire other people's skills after the battle was over. And yet, Teihen realized that he had achieved such a high status not without his own efforts. With a smile, the main character understood that now was the time to rejoice for himself. For a brief moment, he felt the urge to reach the gold rank, but he quickly dismissed the thought. As the day of the meeting with the team was fast approaching, Teihen decided to head to the agreed-upon tavern. Today, he was going to have an important meeting with the group Flameblade. The main character remembered how last time he felt completely unprepared to talk to the adventurers, and now, trying not to give in to his excitement, he was getting ready for the upcoming feast. Suddenly, Ilya appeared in front of him and suggested that they go to the meeting place together. Walking through the city streets with his new friend, Teihen had no idea what to talk to her about. Then he remembered that Jin's leader had promised to resign after completing their upcoming mission. He was genuinely interested in the future of this group, and who would become the new leader. Lost in thought, Teihen accidentally said his last thoughts out loud. Ilya hastened to explain that there was no need to worry about it. She added that Jin and the others intended to return to their homeland after retiring, so the upcoming battle would truly be the last for their team. Ilya also candidly admitted that she had previously wanted to challenge the Woods Eater with only the forces of Steelwing. That's why she said at the time that the group didn't need help and went down into the dungeon alone. The girl regretted that at that moment she was speaking solely out of pride and did not think about other people's feelings at all. She believed that fate had sent the punishing devourer to her as punishment for her arrogance. Ilya once again thanked Teihen for saving her life. Raising her hand, she declared passionately that now they must defeat this monster together. The main character thought about how his new acquaintance had a surprisingly serious approach to life for someone so young. Ilya explained that she didn't want to leave any regrets behind, especially when it came to her last battle as part of the group. When the young people entered the tavern, it turned out that they had arrived before the others. They decided to take the empty seats and wait quietly for the other adventurers to show up. As soon as the rest of the team joined them, they immediately turned to Teihen with a question. They were extremely interested in whether the legendary Iron Bastion was really sitting in front of them. One of the girls turned to the main character and said that she had heard a lot about his battle with the punishing devourer. At the same time, she honestly admitted that she had imagined the guy to be much bigger and more impressive. Feeling a little awkward, Teihen asked his interlocutor to tell him her name. She introduced herself as Shandy, leader of the group Flameblade. Shandy also noted that the young man's face seemed vaguely familiar to her. After a few seconds of thought, she added that she had seen him in the dining hall and usually remembered all the faces she had seen at least once. Moving on to the matter at hand, Jean proposed drawing up a detailed plan for the upcoming battle. After careful preparation, he announced that it would be best to strike in 3 days. Shandy noted that the enemy was enormous and therefore should be attacked simultaneously from different sides. She also pointed out that each team had its own combat tactics, and Teihen was used to traveling alone. Lost in thought, the girl wondered who would take on the most difficult and dangerous part of the attack, namely the frontal assault. The main character raised his hand without hesitation. He volunteered to attack the monster first. Noticing the confusion on the faces of the group leaders, he hastened to explain his decision, saying that he possessed the skills of body, strengthening, and provocation. Thanks to these unique abilities, he was able to distract the enemy's attention to himself in the very first and decisive minutes of the battle. Shandy then patted Teihen on the shoulder approvingly, noting that she liked brave guys. In the end, it was decided that it was indeed best to entrust the center of the battle to the main character. The group leaders asked Teihen to be extremely vigilant and cautious. After the adventurers discussed the disposition of forces and the movement plan in detail, a noisy party was held to raise morale. Holding a mug of drink in her hands, Shandy turned to the main character with interest. She asked why he was so calm and submissive. Watching the relaxed conversation of the people around him, Teihen sank into thoughts about how such feasts had never happened in his former life. He assumed that evenings like this were probably what people meant by having a good time. He also wondered if the drinks prepared in this world would be as delicious as in the game. There were 3 days left until the decisive battle. Wanting to get the missing part of his uniform, Teihen went to the dungeon. Time was running out, so he tried to act as decisively as possible in every battle. Despite the rush, Teihen still managed to collect a full set of Ghost Knight equipment. Earlier, when evaluating these items, it was said that weapons and armor had a special power, and the main character was one of those people who carefully read the full descriptions and recommendations in games. That's why he knew that, in addition to skills, valuable armor could also drop from defeated enemies. When both groups gathered together, the adventurers raised their hands in unison, and they solemnly proclaimed that they were fully prepared to go hunting for the Woods Eater. Despite the earlier agreement to go first, the main character felt a strong sense of anxiety and fear in the face of the unknown. Suddenly, the Woods Eater appeared from the forest. Up close, it seemed even more powerful and imposing than could have been imagined. Teihen clearly realized that now was not the time to be afraid, let alone give up. Summoning all his willpower, he decided to activate his direct attack boost, as well as his defense against physical and magical attacks. After the first blow was struck, Teihen noticed that the sword's recoil was much stronger than he had expected. To his deep surprise, even after using a strike capable of piercing armor, only a minor scratch remained on the monster's body. By that point, the Steel Wing members were focused on attacking the enemy's legs, while the Flame Blade fighters were busy clearing the airspace of attacking condors. At this critical moment, the main character loudly announced to all participants in the battle that he had a plan. He asked one group to take up a position directly in front of the monster's front legs, while instructing the other team to focus entirely on eliminating the condors. Activating his instant step skill, Teihen rushed straight into the open mouth of the magical creature. Unafraid of the deafening roar that rang in his ears, he thought that after regularly consuming golden cherries, he had already grown accustomed to loud noises. Ilya, watching the events unfold from the sidelines, could not hold back a loud scream full of horror and anxiety. Finding himself out of sight of his companions, Teihen used one of the forbidden techniques, which he only resorted to in desperate situations. After a few tense moments following the devastating blow, Teihen found himself on the ground. But, overcoming the pain, he managed to get to his feet. Turning to the group leaders, he urged them to deliver the decisive blow to the weakened monster. When the plan was successfully implemented, all the adventurers burst into joyful cries, celebrating their victory over the formidable Woods Eater. At that very moment, magical stones began to fall from the sky in abundance. And thanks to the enormous size of the defeated creature, the fighters had the honor of receiving a truly generous reward. After the difficult battle was over, the adventurers allowed themselves a little rest, and then proceeded to distribute all the stones and valuable items equally among the participants of the battle. Teihen, among other things, finally managed to get the wood he needed so badly. As he had previously assumed, the Woods Eater really did feed on trents, which is why it was extremely difficult to find them in the forest. The leaders of both groups, as a sign of deep gratitude for his skillful leadership in battle and decisive contribution to victory, gave Teihen all the prepared wood as a generous gift. Observing the sincere and genuine emotions of the main character, the adventurers could not understand why he was rejoicing over an ordinary tree much more than the victory over a powerful enemy. At that moment, the system notified the main character that an opportunity to build a brewery had opened up. Once at the inn, Teihen was lost in thought about the upcoming time with the team at the tavern. However, before the meeting, he needed to build his own brewery using all available materials. It turned out that before the journey to the dungeon, Teihen had prudently submitted an application to build a tree house. After some time, the construction was successfully completed, and almost all of the reward he had received for past battles went into its construction. Despite the significant costs, Teihen was simply overwhelmed with joy at the completion of this long-awaited project. Leafing through the list of drinks available, Teihen settled on an apple drink. It turned out that magic stones were needed to produce the product. However, since Teihen had not yet managed to deliver everything he had mined to the guild, there were enough supplies to make the first batch. Clutching a small wooden barrel in his hands, the protagonist decided to taste the contents to evaluate the results of his labor. A few hours later, engrossed in tasting and reflection, he was surprised to notice that it was already quite dark outside. When he arrived at the tavern, Teihen immediately heard a fair reprimand for being late from Shandy, who had already lost patience while waiting. Apologizing, he presented the company with another container of his homemade drink, and with a smile, he noted that he had not come empty-handed, but with his own treat. Then the adventurers joyfully raised their mugs and drank together to their long-awaited and hard-won victory. Noting the extremely unusual and pleasant taste of the drink, Ilya decided to inquire about its origin. Wanting to keep his little secret, the main character evasively replied that it was confidential information that could not be disclosed. Jean praised the main character, noting that a true adventurer would never reveal all his secrets to just anyone. He added that Teihen never ceases to amaze him. The man explained that he had no doubt about the authenticity of Teihen's fighting abilities, but Jean noted that for his age, the protagonist retained a surprising naivety more typical of a novice. In addition, he was genuinely interested in how Teihen managed to achieve silver rank in such a short time, while others spend years doing so. Laughing, the protagonist explained that he had only recently truly understood how to use his own strength and skills. Taking a sip of his drink, Jean admitted that he still felt some envy towards Teihen's power. However, he immediately added that now, watching him, he firmly believed that Teihen would be able to achieve great success in his endeavors. After all, Jean had already done his part. Ilya gently asked her leader not to say such things at the party, because this was a time for joy, not for sad thoughts. Jean, who was a little tipsy, explained that Teihen was a very capable guy who would have many more encounters and partings in the future. Turning to Ilya, he warmly said that he was already looking forward to meeting her again after she had grown up and matured. She burst into tears from the overwhelming flood of emotions. Ilya raised her mug and asked Teihen to definitely look forward to meeting her again in the future. The main character understood to himself that the drink he had prepared with his own hands was tastier than any other served in the tavern. The merry feast continued until morning, filled with laughter, conversation, and warm farewells. However, a few hours later, both groups were officially disbanded, and each of the adventurers left the western city to go about their business. At that moment, the main character was once again left completely alone, watching his companions leave. Walking through the deserted streets, the main character sank into gloomy thoughts about what seems to be the fate of any adventurer. As soon as you meet someone, get used to their company, and become friends, these people immediately disappear from your life, as if they never existed. Warm encounters were inevitably followed by bitter farewells. And Teihen understood with sad clarity that it was time for him to return to the capital. He had already built the brewery he had dreamed of for so long, and now it was completely ready for operation. He no longer needed anything in the dungeons of the city either. All his goals had been achieved. Then Teihen remembered his original mission, the one that had made him an adventurer in the first place. Fun and safe adventures that did not involve constant risk to his health and life. The girl behind a reception desk was genuinely surprised when Teihen told her about his intention to return home. With a warm smile, the protagonist explained that all his business in the city was now completely finished, and there was no point in staying here any longer. The girl replied regretfully that she would greatly miss their leisurely conversations at the guild, which had become a familiar and pleasant part of her working day. After completing all the necessary formalities related to his departure, she asked Teihen to be sure to return in the future and conquer a few more floors of the dungeon, breaking his own records. Giving a sincere promise to meet again soon, Teihen left the city that had become almost like home to him. He ran swiftly through the familiar forest. He wholeheartedly wished to be home as soon as possible in his familiar and comfortable surroundings. In addition, Teihen was eager to show off his homemade Liberia drinks to surprise and delight her with their unusual flavors. He also planned to meet with the guys immediately and ask them to gather as many medicinal herbs as possible, which could be useful in future adventures. He was also very concerned about the fate of the 3 mysterious girls in hoods who lived next door, whom he had already come to consider almost family. To his surprise, Teihen noticed that he found it incredibly pleasant to care for and worry about someone, because in his previous life, such warm feelings had hardly ever arisen. After all these reflections, Teihen ran without stopping. So strong was his desire to get home as soon as possible and reach the capital in just one day, despite the distance. First, he visited the guild. There he asked to register his stay in the city according to the established rules. He greeted his old acquaintance. The girl behind the counter noted with sincere concern that she had begun to worry about his health due to such long and dangerous travels. Taking the registration card to enter the data, she literally froze in surprise. She saw that his adventurer rank had been upgraded from bronze to silver. For Teihen himself, this reaction was quite expected and even natural, but he still feared that he would be called in for a detailed interrogation to clarify all the details of such a rapid rise. Congratulating the young man on his well-deserved success, the girl enthusiastically confirmed that this was an incredible achievement in such a short time, and that such things happened extremely rarely. When all the formalities of registration were successfully completed, Teihen hurried back to the hotel, not wanting to meet anyone he knew and answer endless questions. Secluding himself in his room, he decided to carefully check his stats after defeating the mighty the Woods Eater. Looking closely at the updated data, Teihen noted with satisfaction that the values of most characteristics had become truly extraordinary. However, to his slight disappointment, his luck stat remained at a fairly low level, practically unchanged. And yet Teihen understood perfectly well that a year ago, he could not even have imagined such a turn of events in the future. He clearly remembered that he was reborn into this world as the same unlucky person he had been before, and even in the unfamiliar guise of an elderly man. Admitting this to himself, quite frankly, Teihen thought that, in essence, nothing in his life should have changed. But thanks to his unique gaming skill, he now possessed truly incredible qualities and powers that were inaccessible to ordinary people. Despite his gaming age, Teihen was well aware that his real life in this world was just beginning, opening up endless horizons of possibilities before him. In addition, he desperately wanted to show himself from the past, that unsuccessful and tired man, to prove with his own eyes that absolutely anything is possible in this life. You just have to want it and make an effort. Clutching the familiar joystick in his hands, the main character wondered what exactly he should do in the near future, what adventures to choose, and what goals to set for himself. The end. Thanks for watching. Write your feedback in the comments. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. See you soon.